Chapter 231, Magic Mirror. Ashlock was once again in the dreamscape below the 9 vertical moons. 8 were dull, cold rocks that were barely visible despite their gargantuan sizes. Their silhouettes were only clear by creating dead zones in the sea of stars that dominated the sky. Only one moon illuminated the sky with a vibrant purple light. The lowest of the moons that Ashlock had dubbed as the spatial moon due to its light carrying spatial chi. It lay on the horizon, and Ashlock had noticed it glow with more power every time he came here. My cultivation is progressing faster as well, Ashlock yawned. It was hard to stay awake in this dreamscape as the gentle celestial breeze made him slowly drift off to sleep. But one day, he wanted answers. What could the moons mean? Ashlock awoke the next day to a chilly winter morning. The seasons seemed to follow the ones he was used to on Earth, but clearly, Chi made the weather changes more drastic. Some light snowfall contrasted the gray skies even though it had been blue yesterday with mild weather. Reminds me of England's weather. It could be sunny in the morning, stormy by the afternoon, and finally snow in the evening. Idolatry daily sign-in system. Day, 3579. Daily credit, 16. Sacrifice credit, 1728. Sign-in. Ashlock dismissed his system message. He would spend 1,000 credits in the past without another thought, but nowadays, he needed to ensure he always had some credits. It's been over 2 weeks since the meeting with the Silver Spires, Ashlock idly thought as he felt his body wake up, which took far longer than usual in the cold and dark. Diana left last night to meet Sebastian's acquaintance, who had traveled here from the Silver Spires territory to get her into the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion. I wonder how that went. He could have stayed up to overhear the conversation, but then he would have wasted valuable time he could have spent sleeping with his new S-grade sleeping skill Nocturnal Genesis. Since he was now in the 8th stage of the Star Core realm, Nascent's soul wasn't that far away. He was determined to reach that next realm of power as soon as possible. With his system skills and unique body, he was confident he could become the overlord of this area once he reached that new height. So, with the goal of increasing his cultivation as fast as possible, over the last 2 weeks, he had instructed Douglas and Stella to use up a large chunk of the spirit stones they had looted from the bounty hunters to construct a grand chi gathering array on Red Vine Peak and also smaller arrays in each of the numerous groves he had dotting the mountain range. This helped boost his cultivation speed through the day, and then he had Nocturnal Genesis for nighttime. He also avoided using techniques that consumed his chi, like making portals, and told everyone to fly or walk rather than rely on him to transport them around. It was an odd thought, but to rapidly advance in power, he had to do as little as possible and sleep as much as he could. Cultivation really was designed for trees. I don't know how human cultivators can sit in caves for decades to go up a single stage. No wonder they are keen to flex their powers on anyone who disrespects them. Hell, I would do the same if I walked out of a cave after a decade of sitting perfectly still to get stronger, only for some brat to disrespect me. Ashlock realized he was more grumpy in the mornings, especially during the colder months. Who wouldn't wake up in a bad mood without warm sunshine or chirping birds? Just gray skies and misery. I should do something productive today rather than sleep, Ashlock muttered as his body finally stopped being a sloth. He shook away the sluggishness plaguing him and got ready for a new day. A portal suddenly rippled into existence. Morning tree. You're up earlier than usual, Stella said as she strode through while dragging someone by the arm. It was the corpse of a brown-haired man that Ashlock didn't recognize. Morning Stella, is that another one? Ashlock asked with abyssal whispers. Yeah, the Red Clothes reported that someone was seen snooping around in Darklight City for me. Cows caught this blockhead trying to climb the mountain and killed him before he could even blink. Stella's hand wreathed in purple flames, and the corpse floated to Ashlock with telekinesis. So here's an early lunch for you. I already looted the corpse, nothing much to note. Much like that last few fools. Ashlock used Consuming Abyss to conjure black vines to devour the corpse as Stella came to sit on the bench. She didn't even bat an eye at the sound of cracking bones or the smell of dissolving flesh. Did you figure out that mirror artifact Riker picked for you? Ashlock asked. He had been relatively absent from Stella's life recently due to sleeping a lot and focusing on expanding his root network during the day since that didn't take much chi. His roots now sprawled out below the whole of Darklight City, had reached Slimer and he was also far out into the wilderness and would soon arrive at the area where he had fought Nox. He had also instructed Larry to plant fruit containing a demonic seed when he hunted out in the wilderness, so there were now many small outcrops of demonic trees to the east. Stella nodded at his question and brought out the mirror. It was a rather basic silver-framed mirror about the size of a person's hand that wouldn't look out of place in a charity or antique shop. Even Stella didn't seem to find it that impressive despite how polished her reflection looked. I did some testing based on some ideas Sebastian gave me and from reading the runic array on the back. Stella flipped the mirror over and traced the many runic lines with her finger. This is a rather intricate chi storage array. I was confused about why a mirror would have a storage array until Sebastian told me some powerful defensive artifacts could absorb attacks. So it's a defensive artifact. Stella shook her head. Yes and no, it can be used defensively but is more of an offensive artifact. There is also a reflection array, but it's built inside the mirror, so I didn't see it before. Reflection array. So it can store and reflect chi. Yeah, for example, I had the elder Margaret shoot a fireball at it. Stella explained, if I insert chi into the mirror, it can absorb and store a single attack at a time. I can then shoot the fireball back out at the same strength. This tale has been pilfered from Royal Road. If found on Amazon, kindly file a report. That seems really strong. If a godly being struck you down with a lightning attack, could you store it and then shoot it back at them? Stella snorted. No, that would be ridiculous. It can only store attacks weaker than the level of chi I insert into it, and the whole thing is quite costly. Most of the time, it would be better to block the attack with my own chi or attack myself. But I like that it gives me some options. Although I have to be careful, if I forget to put chi into it, the artifact acts like a usual mirror. It will shatter if I simply drop it. So if you became a godly being, it could reflect another godly being's attack. Stella blinked. Yes. That would work. She then glanced at the mirror and muttered, I should cultivate more. Plus 367 SC. It hadn't been long, but it appeared the corpse had already been absorbed. Ashlock felt a small rush of chi surge down the vines and enter his enormous soul. However, the rush was incredibly short-lived and felt like pouring a cup of water into a swimming pool. Judging from the credits I got, the corpse should be around the middle of the star core realm. Perhaps 5th or 6th stage. Ashlock was glad nobody of Nox's caliber had shown up thus far to try and kill Stella. This was the third person who had tried their luck to claim the bounty and the strongest one so far. Is that Diana? Stella suddenly said, drawing Ashlock from his thoughts. Following her gaze, Ashlock saw Diana on the horizon, gliding through the snowfall with her vast raven wings while shrouded in demonic mist. She was coming in at high speed, and rather than touching down at the edge of his canopy, she flew toward Stella with a sword drawn. Stella leapt forward off the bench and met the attack with her own sword. A shower of sparks illuminated both of their faces, and a loud clang echoed out, causing a few birds that had made Ashlock's branches their home to flee in fear. Ashlock was utterly baffled and unsure of what to do. What was going on? Why had Diana suddenly attacked Stella? To his surprise, neither could push the other back despite their cultivation differences. Why isn't Stella's bloodline activating? Ashlock wondered but then came to a realization. She didn't feel threatened. Stella suddenly vanished, making Diana stumble forward. Stella reappeared a second later beside Diana, planting a foot in her side just below her ribs, sending her hurtling a few meters through the air before Diana caught herself in midair with her wings and managed to stabilize herself before she face-planted. Diana grinned, showing her fangs. To think I would fail my first ever mission as a new bounty hunter. How shameful. She retracted her wings and landed softly on the stone below. Also, that kick hurt. Stella shook her head and laughed. I hardly put anything into that kick. You're being dramatic and throwing yourself through the air like that. You caught me. Diana raised her hands. But it was a good kick. I must admit. I assume you managed to join the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion from this rather dramatic entrance. Ashlock asked Diana. Oh. Good morning, Patriarch, sorry if I woke you. Diana apologized, quickly activated her new artifact boots to blur forward, and then sat on the bench. Her ring flashed with a silver light, and a pendant appeared in her hand. This used to be the headless spatial guy's pendant, but it's been switched to my name now, thanks to Sebastian's contact, so I didn't have to travel all the way to one of their branches to pick one up. Stella came to sit beside Diana and squinted at the pendant. What name did you register with? Diana Reborn, she sighed. Sebastian's contact refused to let me register with a fake name. Apparently, if it's discovered that you registered with a fake name, you are banished on the spot. Interesting. Did the contact explain why? Ashlock asked. It seemed like a strange requirement for an admittedly very public underground organization focused on killing people. Diana flipped over the pendant. Inserting some chi, the whole thing glowed, and Stella's bounty appeared. Death of Stella crestfallen. Target's estimated threat level, Star Core 1 unverified. Affiliation with Ashlock Trading Company, Star Core 9 unverified. Bounty, 6,000 Yingxi coins. Double if completed by sundown, failed. The bounty is placed by Nox Duskwalker, and the target is at the marked location. For more information, consult a Lotus informant. Bounties are tied to the name of the person who ordered them. So, in this example, it would be Nox Duskwalker. Names have a reputation, and I was already advised against taking bounties from a few people. That's rather inconvenient, Ashlock grumbled. Your surname connects you to the Blood Lotus sect, Darklight City, and if Nox hears of it, she may recognize it. Diana nodded. That's true, but the only time my name will appear publicly is if I place a bounty. When I sell pills for Yingxi coins, only the Lotus informant I am selling to will be aware of my full name if I want to remain as anonymous as possible. Besides, we can always use a proxy to place the bounties. A proxy? Stella asked. You can transfer Yingxi coins to someone else and have them place the bounty for you using their name, Diana shrugged. They are willing to sacrifice their reputation for a little extra on the side. Should be fine then. Ashlock mused. So these Lotus informats are like guild NPCs that act behind the scenes. Good to know. Unaware of his thoughts, Stella said, Did you ask the Lotus informat person about my bounty? Yeah, alongside others to not look suspicious, Diana replied. You have one of the highest bounties that a person of the Crimson Tracker rank would take, so you will have many mid-level Star Core fools after you. Crimson Tracker. Stella tilted her head. What's that? There are 3 ranks of bounty hunters, from my understanding. I am currently of the lowest rank, an Iron Seeker. Since I am strong enough to be Crimson Tracker, which is the next rank, I will be promoted if I go to a branch and take some tests because of who recommended me. Diana paused. So your bounty appeals to these people the most. It may be an unverified one, which means your true strength is unknown, but it's paying triple any other bounty the Lotus informat recommend me, so some desperate people will hunt you despite the risk. Stella hummed and thought, what were the other bounties like? Lots of ones for around 1,000 to 3,000 Yingxi coins for all types of people. Many merchants were on the list alongside scions of families I assume reside in the Tainted Cloud sect since I didn't recognize their surnames. Diana tapped the pendant as she tried to remember. Oh yeah, there was one for 100,000 Yingxi coins for the Blood Lotus Patriarch. I was told a bounty like that would only be taken on by a Jade Sentinel, which is the highest rank. They are the elites of the pavilion. But maybe Ashlock could kill him and credit me for the kill. That's a great idea, Ashlock replied. He should be strong enough to fight the Patriarch within the next year. But for that, he needed peace and quiet so he could focus on getting stronger. Not wasting chi on charging up his ints to kill these Crimson Tracker idiots and possibly a few Jade Sentinels. The corpses are tasty, but it's just annoying, Ashlock mulled. I want the Red Clothes to start taking on cultivators of other affinities from Darklight City, but with bounty hunters snooping around, it's too risky. I don't want a bounty hunter to slip in under the guise of joining the Ashlock sect just to stab Stella in the face. Luckily, there was a solution. Ashlock could have Kaida infuse his will through divine ink to create contracts similar to oaths as they were overseen by the heavens. But for that to happen sustainably, Kaida needed an ink affinity bastion to call home where he could cultivate ink chi. When did I last check on Kaida and his ink tree? A few days ago. Maybe it's taken on ink affinity by now. Ashlock's vision blurred as he descended the mountain through his roots and into the well-obscured rock ship that housed the ink lake. Ashlock had been making use of nocturnal genesis to speed up the growth of himself and his entire forest. But the skill really showed its value by speeding up the development of the tree in the ink lake and those that made up groves. For example, the illusion affinity trees that Elaine had been cultivating in the middle of 4. The last 2 weeks were now releasing even more chi as their cultivation stages increased. Kaida was lounging on the rocky shore of the ink lake, reading over one of the many books Ashlock had given him. The lindworm lazily flipped the pages as his long tail trailed off into the ink lake and swished around, causing ripples. As much as Ashlock loved his pet snake and wanted to say hello, he first checked on what he came here for. Using progeny dominion since its restriction of soul damage wasn't so big of a concern anymore, a fragment of his soul traveled through the roots and entered the tree. Ignoring Kaida's surprised shriek from the tree bursting into flames and pressure descending on the room, Ashlock could confirm that the weak little tree had a tiny soul core attuned to the ink affinity, which meant it was time to create his second ever bastion. Chapter 232, literally a tree. Before Ashlock could create his second ever bastion, he needed Kaida to stop freaking out. "It's me," Ashlock said in as soft a voice as he could muster, "calm down." But it was already too late. Kaida had already inserted his chi into one of his scales near his neck. The ancient runic words he had carved into the ink scale glowed with a heavenly light, and before Ashlock got a chance to read what had been inscribed, the scale consumed itself, and a purple glow suddenly enshrouded Kaida. The Lindy worm began to float into the air with his tail still curled on the ground. His claws were opened at his sides as if ready to lash out, and his golden eyes were firmly set on the tree ablaze with spatial flames before him in the middle of the ink lake. "So you learned levitation," Ashlock said casually. "I didn't expect you to learn how to fly before you got wings." Kaida seemed to finally realize the suddenly flaming tree was his master, not an attack on himself or the midnight ink wing eggs he was entrusted to protect. Kaida visibly relaxed and began hissing happily. He lowered to the ground, stopped glowing with the purple light, and etched into the ground in ink with the tip of his claw. "Yes. You were never one to speak much, were you?" Ashlock laughed at Kaida's simple response. Kaida reabsorbed the ink into his body to not waste any of his precious ink and then wrote, "Prefer reading. Writing hard. I suppose most would consider reading easier than writing, but in your case, it's even more so since you can gain heavenly insight from words written via ink in a book. That's how you managed to learn the levitation technique, right? Was it from one of those books I gave you from the Azure clan?" Kaida nodded his head instead of bothering to write a response. Now that everything had calmed down, under the flickering light from Ashlock's ablaze offspring, he could read some of the ancient runic words inscribed into Kaida's scales. It was clear that Kaida had not been idle the last few weeks since leaving the mystic realm, as he already had something prepared on around 20 of his scales. This was impressive, considering it had taken him half a day to comprehend the spatial blades technique and then another few hours to inscribe it into one of his scales. "I can see 5 spatial blade technique scales, which should have taken a day or two of concentrating on inscribing," Ashlock mused. "There are also 2 levitation ones near his neck with 1 empty space for a scale because he used it when he got scared, so there must have been 3. Ink affinity was one of the most double-edged sword affinities Ashlock had encountered since arriving in this world. Kaida could use any affinity he wished by exchanging his ink chi, just like a moment ago when he used spatial chi for levitation. So he didn't suffer from getting countered like other chi types, such as light and shadow chi. However, that came with a high cost, much like void chi. Since ink chi is rare, Kaida had to rely on his star core's natural regeneration and converting untamed chi, which is highly inefficient. But with great cost comes many advantages, as Ashlock had experienced when he didn't even manage to get a word in before Kaida had already activated his levitation scale and prepared to fight. He can use any technique with an instant cast speed, which is a massive advantage until he runs out of prepared techniques on his scales, and since it takes him hours to make a new inscribed scale, Kaida would have no option but to retreat when he runs out of scales. Ashlock mused, also if anyone can read the ancient runic language, they will know exactly how many of each technique he has left. Kaida had evolved all the way from an F-grade grass snake into a B-grade lindworm and now sat somewhere in the mid-stages of the star core realm, meaning with fighting practice and if he learned a wide range of techniques, he would have a combatability on par with Stella and the Redclaw Grand Elder who were in the 4th and 6th stages respectively. Studying his scales more, Ashlock saw something inscribed into one of the scales that surprised him. "You learned spatial lock already?" Ashlock asked. Kaida put his nose to the sky and acted very smug in response. "You cheating bastard." Ashlock half joked. At this point, he had spent a few weeks trying to learn that advanced technique and had only managed to grasp a single part. So, for Kaida to have comprehended it already alongside so many other techniques made him somewhat jealous. Now that Kaida had his head to the sky, his neck was on full display, where he had hidden quite a few scales from view with his chin. Ashlock saw spatial techniques such as spatial step and anchor seal among the ones there. However, one thing bugged Ashlock. Why were there no void techniques? He had given Kaida the books from the Void Mind Elder's belongings alongside the Azure Clan books, so why hadn't Kaida gotten around to learning any void techniques? "Kaida, Didn't I give you some technique books belonging to a void cultivator? Why haven't you learned any of their techniques? Kaida lowered his head and etched out on the stone in ink, void impossible to understand. How so? Kaida hissed with annoyance as he lumbered his 10-meter-long body over to the bookshelf and fished out 2 books from the bookshelf built into the room's wall. Stella or I, as real spatial cultivators, would just use telekinesis to float the books to us rather than bother walking over, but Kaida would have to sacrifice a scale to use a single technique. Sort of an odd drawback of ink affinity to consider. Ashlock mused as he watched Kaida place the books on the stone floor and flip them open with his claw. I'm still working out how Kaida will contribute in future battles with the bounty hunters coming and the beast tide on the horizon. Kaida will likely be a heavy hitter capable of obliterating someone by unleashing attacks of various affinities all at once. Which is why he had hoped Kaida could learn void techniques. Kaida tapped the books on the floor while looking straight at the tree as if gesturing for Ashlock to pay attention. How could his pet tell when he was lost in thought? Was his lack of attention that obvious? Yes, I am watching. What are you trying to show me? Kaida rolled his golden eyes before tapping the left book. Pushing chi into the page of the book under his claw, which Ashlock recognized as a technique book of the Azure clan that Stella had robbed from their library in the Pocket Realm. The ink on the page glowed, rose off the page, and floated into his mind, easily phasing through his scales as if they weren't even there. Shaking his head and body as if he were a dog trying to dry himself, Kaida managed to break himself out of the daze that occurred the last time he had used the Heavenly Insight skill on the Spatial Blades manual, which had lasted till sunset. Letting out a hiss, Kaida turned his attention to the second book. He briefly flipped up the cover to show Ashlock the book title, Whispers of the Void. Kaida then turned to a page in the middle of the book. Ashlock noted that he could read the words, which described some sort of void skill. Sadly, it was written in even more confusing, flowery language than other books he had seen, and he couldn't make heads or tails about what the skill was supposed to do. He thought it was a technique book of some kind because it matched the format he had seen in Azure Clan books with diagrams flanked by blocks of flowery text like a science textbook. Kaida once again pushed chi into the ink on the page, but this time was different. There was no heavenly glow, and the words did not rise off the page. The confusing words remained their usual dulled ink on the page. So the heavens are unable to offer you any insight into void techniques? Ashlock asked, and Kaida nodded his head. In a way, it made sense. From Ashlock's own understanding, shaped by what Elaine had told him, void was something entirely outside of heaven's control, which was why it was so powerful but also so hard to cultivate. Therefore, the fact that heaven was unable or didn't wish to provide Kaida any insight into how to wield void techniques made sense. A case of theft. This story is not rightfully on Amazon. If you spot it, report the violation. The question now was if Kaida was totally barred from void techniques altogether. Was it impossible for Kaida's divine ink chi to replicate void techniques even though it seemingly could manifest anything under the heaven's will into existence? Likely no, but it was still worth a try. I will get Elaine to come over and try to teach you a void technique sometime, but before that, let's get you a proper cultivation environment. Ashlock said, first, I need you, all these books, and the midnight inkwing eggs to leave while this tree undergoes its heavenly tribulation to quickly ascend to the star core realm. Kaida let out an annoyed hiss. Stop being lazy. It will only take an hour or so at most, and after that, you will have a constantly refilling lake of ink chi fed by this tree. Doesn't that sound nice? Refusing to take no for an answer, Ashlock's vision blurred as he returned to Red Vine Peak, where he found Stella and Diana sitting on the bench and still happily chatting away about the bounties. Sorry to interrupt, but can you two help me with something? Ashlock asked through abyssal whispers. Sure, tree, what's up? Stella asked while gazing up at his canopy. The tree in the ink lake has finally formed a soul core with ink affinity, so it's time to create a second bastion. But for that, I need Kaida and everything else to leave so nothing gets obliterated by the lightning. Oh wow, that was fast. Stella stood up and pulled Diana up. Let's go. I haven't seen Kaida in a while. I wonder if he still hates me. A while passed with the two standing there glancing around. Tree. Where's the portal? I know you are still here. I'm saving my chi, so fly down yourselves. You know where it's located at the mountain's base. The two girls grumbled. Ashlock started to notice just how lazy his sect members were. Was this his fault somehow? Had his slothfulness as a tree rubbed off on them? Do we have to fly? Stella protested. It's pouring down with rain. Since when did a little water hurt anyone? You're protesting about rain, but aren't you using me as cover right now? How do you think I feel? Stella rolled her eyes. You are literally a tree. I bet you are loving it. But I am a human girl, in case you forgot, and I hate getting my hair wet. Have Diana dry it for you. Ashlock replied. Do you want me to help you or not? Stella crossed her arms. Just open a darn portal. You regenerate chi so fast it's a drop in the bucket for you. I don't want to spend my chi making 20 portals to get down there just to still get my hair wet. You can rip space apart and fly around on a sword, but you revert to being a wuss the moment it's raining a little, Ashlock muttered as he made the portal. Admittedly, he didn't even notice the chi inside his star core change, but it was still silly. Why should he have to spend any chi at all? Stella and Diana walked through the portal, and Ashlock closed it behind them. Am I the one being unreasonable? He wondered for a moment. Surely not. I never remember rain being that bad when I was a human, and they are cultivators, for heaven's sake. Diana is literally a water cultivator. She should love the rain more than I do. Deciding to drop the topic, Ashlock returned his view to the fragment of his soul inside the ink affinity tree. The heavy rain drummed on the dome stone roof overhead, and water cascaded down onto the demonic tree's leaves through the hole in the ceiling. Glancing around, Ashlock saw on the shore of the ink lake a dozen meters from the tree that Diana had embraced Kaida in a hug and was busy patting his head. Meanwhile, Stella walked along the sides of the room and absorbed all the books into a spatial ring. Are you sure this is a good idea? Diana broke the silence, gazing at the ablaze tree Ashlock was inhabiting while resting her head on Kaida's. Someone ascending to the star core realm is treated as a big deal in the wilderness. Doing this will draw the interest of any cultivators and bounty hunters lurking in Darklight City to this location. Diana did have a point. He should wait until the Mystic Realm in 2 weeks and conduct the ascension there away from prying eyes. Which is what he would have thought in the past. I agree. I should do it in the Mystic Realm, but I am more scared of attracting the attention of powerhouses lurking in there than those around here, Ashlock said truthfully. Other than the top dogs of the demonic sects, such as the Patriarch, who was still in closed-door cultivation to his knowledge, and the nascent soul cultivators in the Tainted Cloud sect, far from here, he didn't fear anyone else. Stella paused near the eggs to say, yeah, compared to the Azure clan, the Blood Lotus sect and its Patriarch aren't as much of a threat. However, we should still be overly cautious of them. Unlike the Azure clan that has been unable to follow us thus far down to this lower realm, we can't exactly run from the Blood Lotus sect and their thousands of cultivators. Good point, Ashlock replied as he thought of a solution. The ink tree's ascension to Star Core should take an hour or so at most compared to an average person who takes weeks. That alone should reduce suspicion as people will suspect the person ascending failed. But we still need to hide it from those lurking nearby. So, to be on the safe side while the ascension is happening, I will have Zeus obscure the area with an even larger storm, and Titus can shroud the area in fractured space as well. He would also call Chaos and Larry to watch the perimeter and kill anyone who got too close. The two girls agreed with his plan, and 10 minutes later, all three of them returned to Red Vine Peak and took shelter under his canopy. With everything out of the way, he got Titus and Zeus in position. Gazing up through the hole in the ceiling, Ashlock could see the two giant beings of twisted wood looming over, casting long shadows in the already fierce storm and gray skies. Nobody would find it strange if this heavy storm began to unleash roaring thunder and lightning, Ashlock mused. Little do they know, it's all a cover for a little tree's rise to a realm mortals can only dream of within a person's lunch break. Sometimes, Ashlock wondered if he was cheating. But then he had to remind himself of what he needed to kill to gather the 1,000 sacrificial credits it cost to make a bastion, plus the 5,000 credits he spent on getting the skill in the first place. Alright, let's do this, Ashlock said to hype himself up. Second floating tree is a go. Under his direction, Zeus raised his hand to the heavens. The skies overhead darkened even more, and moments later, thunder began to roar out as the skies flashed with light. Make sure none of your lightning bolts hit any of my children, Zeus, Ashlock reminded the titan of white marble like wood. Your job is to obscure and absorb the heavens' lightning, not to cause forest fires and mass destruction. With that talk out of the way, Ashlock opened his beloved system menu and activated his SSS grade skill Skyborn Bastion. Do you wish to activate the Skyborn Bastion? The cost is 1,000 sacrificial credits and the required materials to form a bastion core. The materials in question were the surrounding rock and spirit stones that Douglas had already ingrained into the floating island during its design process. "Yes, I want to create a new skyborn bastion," Ashlock said, and he saw the message vanish and a new one appear alongside 1,000 credits disappearing from his balance. Forming bastion core. The mountain began to tremble like last time, and waves of power began rolling across the mountainscape. "Titus, distort the area now," Ashlock instructed, and the Titan of Black wood complied. His purple fire eyes blazed with power, and the surrounding area distorted as space cracked and twisted to an outside observer. Bastion's chi source has been designated as Ashlock. The roots that linked Ashlock to this ink affinity tree were severed and replaced with those ethereal ones that crossed space. From now on, he would always be connected to this tree no matter where it was. Error, unnamed progeny cultivation too low to operate bastion core. "There's the message I have been waiting for," Ashlock cheered. A part of him had been worried that the error had been a one-time thing. Initiating tribulation. If the storm had been a 5 in intensity before, that system message dialed it up to a 10 almost immediately. A bolt of white lightning slammed down on the bastion, obliterating the rock ceiling of the room. Blocks of rock tumbled into the ink lake below like an avalanche, causing ink to splash everywhere. Luckily, Zeus had caught one of the other lightning bolts and absorbed it into his body, while another was blocked by a rippling purple barrier, which was Ashlock's A-grade lightning chi barrier. Some of heaven's power made it through their layers of defenses and trickled down into the tree's soul core, causing it to crack and then reform bigger than before. Unnamed progeny soul fire second stage. If we didn't dampen the power, the poor tree would be obliterated in a single strike. Ashlock cursed the heavens as he saw another round of lightning coming. Even with his system forcing the tribulation, his offspring still needed to survive it, just like any other cultivator. Still, since he was speedrunning the process, the little tree did not have a strong enough soul to survive. "You're lucky to have such a powerful dad who can help you through this," Ashlock said, but knew the tree would hardly understand him. Until the tree had formed its own star core, it was incapable of complex thought. Unnamed progeny soul fire third stage. Unnamed progeny soul fire fourth stage. Unnamed progeny soul fire fifth stage. Unnamed progeny soul fire sixth stage. Unnamed progeny soul fire seventh stage. Unnamed progeny soul fire 8th stage. Unnamed progeny soul fire 9th stage. After many minutes of having its soul core nearly obliterated and then reformed, it was finally large enough and filled with chi to rapidly expand outward into a blazing ball of darkness. It was time for the tree to form its star core. The miniature sun that looked like the planet Neptune dipped in ink but on fire, rose above the tree's canopy and through the half-wrecked ceiling. The heavenly tribulation seemed to take this as a direct challenge as the lightning increased tenfold. Forming star core. Zeus and Ashlock worked tirelessly to try to shield the ball of ink chi from being vaporized, and after an agonizing 10 minutes that burned far more of Ashlock's chi reserves than he was comfortable with, it was done. The storm overhead relaxed to its previous vigor. Star core formed. The star core of ink chi fell back into the tree. Bastion's operator has been successfully designated as unnamed progeny. Bastion's affinity type set to ink. Ashlock then noticed a ball of swirling ink larger than a person appear below the tree's roots, which was different from the amethyst crystal that had formed below Willow. Skyborn Bastion active. The ground finally stopped trembling. It was all finished. Or so Ashlock had thought. Ink began to seep through the tree's bark and rippled on the surface into a shape, text, runic text, to be exact. His offspring was writing to him. He waited patiently, and the result was hard to decipher, but there was no doubt about it. "Father, please give me a name." His offspring wanted a name. Chapter 233, Flying Library. Ashlock had been so focused on keeping his offspring alive through the tribulation that he had mostly ignored the system's messages in favor of keeping the lightning chi barrier active and directing Zeus to catch some of the stray lightning bolts. "Of course, you can have a name. Just give me a second." Ashlock went into a slight panic as no names came to mind. He had named Willow in the heat of the moment, but now that he had an offspring capable of writing to him patiently waiting for their name, there was a lot of pressure. It should be something ink-related. Inky? No, that's too generic. What about Jet? Raven? Ebony? Those all mean some form of black like the color of the ink, but they also don't feel right. Thankfully, trees perceive time on a longer scale than humans. Ashlock spent over an hour mulling over options while his offspring happily waited. He had never been that interested in having children back on Earth, but after raising Stella and now having thousands of offspring that look like mini versions of himself, he was glad he didn't miss out on the joy of children in this new life. I think I got it, Ashlock said with far less certainty than he probably should after having spent so long in thought. What about the name Quill? A wave of happiness came from the ink tree he was inhabiting. Ashlock could only chuckle. He suspected Quill would have been happy with any name he could come up with, but he felt the name was very fitting. Okay, from now on, you shall be known as Quill Ashfolin. Bastion's operator has been successfully designated as Quill Ashfolin. Phew. Okay, now that you have a name, could you fly the Bastion to Red Vine Peak while the storm is still going? It will act as a natural camouflage. Ashlock asked. Quill responded by pulling on Ashlock's chi reserves. Spatial chi from Ashlock's star core poured through the ethereal roots that connected them and entered Quill's soul, where the spatial chi was converted into ink chi and then sent down into the Bastion core. Despite the drain on his star core, Ashlock let the events play out. This was the first time he had a Bastion of a different chi type, as Willow had a spatial Bastion core. So, this was a worthwhile experiment. I guess it works similarly to Mayans, where Titus is the cheapest to power up, as there's no need to convert my spatial chi into another chi type like void or fire. The ground began to shake as Quill operated the ship and made it rise. The rock supports tumbled down into the hole the Bastion had been carved from. Titus and Zeus, keep up the spatial distortion and storm overhead until the Bastion has reached the mountain peak, Ashlock instructed the two in standing on the Bastion surface. So far, their concealment had worked as nobody had shown up in the last hour, so there was no reason to relax until the Bastion was safely secured on Red Vine Peak. Quill certainly wasn't the greatest pilot, as he clipped the canopies of some nearby evergreens while trying to fly up into the sky. Still, it would be unfair for Ashlock to expect such expertise from a tree that basically became fully conscious an hour ago. Take it slow and steady. There's no rush, Ashlock informed Quill, and he felt the Bastion slow to around half its maximum speed. Clearly, Quill had found the Bastion's top speed too much to handle. Ashlock planned to take control once they neared the top, as he didn't want Quill accidentally ramming an asteroid-sized lump of flying rock into him. However, while he had Quill pulling on his chi and they were shrouded by Titus and Zeus's efforts, he wanted to test the Bastion's capabilities as he might not get another chance since he planned for this Bastion to remain as a defensive one on Red Vine Peak. System, activate the Bastion's shield, Ashlock said, and he felt the dense ball of swirling ink that was the Bastion core below Quill's roots begin to spin faster. It then began to expand outward, and as if it were ethereal, it passed through the rock, and soon enough, there was a thin bubble of ink surrounding the ship. Ink shield, active. I can't see anything. Ashlock laughed. It was as if he had turned off the lights. This is so unlike the spatial shield on Willow's Bastion that dyed the outside world in a purple hue but was still translucent so one could see through. This ink shield is like the cultivator equivalent of black-tinted windows. Perfect for obscuring what was going on from outsiders, but terrible for those on the Bastion as they had no way to see what was happening beyond the ink shield. Okay, I'm glad I tested this out beforehand. Ashlock deactivated the shield and then asked the system to activate the artillery. Giant flowers that looked like roses dipped in ink sprouted from crevices in the rock. Ink artillery, active. Ashlock dismissed the system notification and surged some chi toward one of the flowers. He only targeted one as he didn't plan to waste more chi than needed. A glob of ink formed on the flower's petals by consuming far more chi than he felt reasonable. Is that it? Ashlock wondered, all that chi for a mere blob of ink? Surely not. He tried to transform it into something to little effect, which was concerning. He didn't see how an overpriced blob of ink being hurled at someone would do much. Hey Quill, are you able to do anything with this? Ashlock asked his new star core offspring. I will take control of the ship so you can concentrate. Just try to shape it or something. Ashlock felt Quill concede his control of the ship to him, and he promptly doubled the speed to the maximum, which made the demonic tree blaze with purple soul fire. But ink also covered its trunk, which showed that when Ashlock merged his soul fragment with Quill, they became a dual affinity. Two minds and souls in one body. The ink rippled, and Quill wrote on his trunk, Father, what effect should I do? You can put an effect into the blob of ink. The ink rippled to show a new word, yes. Ashlock spread out his spiritual sense. All around him was a sea of his offspring, so firing anything at the ground could cause harm to his children. Put the effect flash of light into the ink blob and fire it into the sky. Okay, father. Ashlock saw the blob of ink compress into a noodle of ink and then begin to take on the same of the ancient runic translation for the effect he had told Quill to add. The giant black rose then twisted to the sky, and he saw the floating ink shoot into storm clouds overhead. Moments later, the dark skies lit up with an intense light that lasted for a split second. Unauthorized use. This story is on Amazon without permission from the author. Report any sightings. Interesting. It seems operating a bastion is more of a two-person job than I originally thought, Ashlock contemplated. I could operate and do everything on Willow's bastion as we shared an affinity, but here on Quill's bastion, everything is far more expensive to use. I even need Quill to operate the artillery. The only other operation to check would be the ink storm, but there was no way he was wasting that much chi, even on a test. If firing a single blob of ink cost him this much chi, what would a storm cost? Even on Willow's bastion, it had been chi intensive. Deactivating the artillery, Ashlock also cut off access to his soul and told Quill to use his own ink chi to power the bastion's flight rather than relying on his due to the horrible conversion rate. It was hard to nail down just how bad it was, but Ashlock estimated he was spending between 10 and 100 times more chi than when he operated Willow's bastion. Arriving at the summit of Red Vine Peak, the bastion floated over the mist wall swirling around the perimeter of demonic trees. Ashlock now needed to decide where he could hide this darn thing. I want to keep it out of sight from any other cultivators if possible, especially since it will contain all of our books and other important documents, and in this world, there are far too many infiltration techniques like Void Step. Ashlock mulled as the bastion loomed in the sky, casting a shadow on Red Vine Peak as the storm overhead slowly cleared up. There's only really one place that I can hide such a large thing. Ashlock floated the bastion over toward the giant hole that went through the center of the mountain. It was around 100 meters across, and a 50-meter wide obelisk was in the middle. Over the last few weeks, the Mudcloaks had been hard at work, and the 8,000-meter-tall obelisk was the first thing they completed. Only the tip of it was yet to be done, leaving the top flat and not quite reaching the surface. Construction had likely been halted due to the rain, so it was empty right now. I can park the bastion over there. It's only 30 meters long and 10 meters wide, so it won't even take up all of the obelisk's top and block any sunlight from making its way down the hole. Ashlock slowly lowered the bastion on top of the stone pillar covered in the moss the Mudcloaks like to eat that went all the way down into the darkness. What the hell is going on? Douglas hollered as he emerged from a room built inside the hole and lumbered up the spiral staircase jutting out from the rock face. Excited Mudcloaks blanked him and pointed up at the obelisk. Big rock. Big rock. They shouted while gesturing wildly and tugging at Douglas's cloak that shielded him from the dying storm as he made his way to the surface. What are you fools on about? What big rock? Douglas grumbled as he squinted through the rain. I can't see anything through this darn rain, and my spiritual senses aren't picking anything up. You guys aren't dragging me out here to see a bird again, right? Ashlock realized the problem and commanded Titus and Zeus to cease their concealment. As the spatial distortion faded away, Douglas's eyes widened. You fuckers were right, there is a big fucking rock all of a sudden. Ashlock waited for Douglas to reach the surface before speaking into his mind with abyssal whispers. Sorry to bother you, Douglas, but could you make a bridge to the new library? Douglas popped a mind fortress fruit and squinted at the bastion. Library. Is that Kata's home that I helped build? That's right, and I felt this was the best place for it. Ashlock replied, it's right next to my main body, surrounded by dozens of my most powerful offspring, on top of an 8,000 meters tall pillar and surrounded by a 25-meter wide gap. If anyone wanted to break in from the sky, they would have to do it under my non-existent nose, and if they came from below, they would pass by hundreds of Mudcloaks and my roots. Douglas nodded along to his words with an increasingly wide grin. The patriarch is wise. This is a far better location than down at the mountain base far away from you. Ashlock hummed in agreement. Since it's a bastion capable of combat, it doubles up as a shelter during a battle with its shields and artillery. Not to mention Kaida and Quill, who would be inside. Quill? Douglas asked. Who's that? My offspring. Quill is the ink affinity tree that's inside? Ah, I see, Douglas nodded. So, what type of bridge do you want? That was a good question. Ashlock was cautious about building a giant stone bridge as it would cut off sunlight from reaching the moss and Mudcloaks below. It would also serve as a massive hazard during a fight. If it were to be blown up by an attack, large chunks of stone would rain down and cause enormous damage. Would a floating bridge be possible? Ashlock asked. Like perhaps a single slab of stone that, when stepped on, would float to the other side. Douglas crossed his arms. It's possible for sure. The slab would need inscribed runic formations, such as a chi gathering array and something like levitation or telekinesis. Formations would also need to be built into the wall of the hole and into the obelisk so the floating platform knows what 2 points to travel between. Sounds good. Ashlock replied. Once the storm settles down in a bit, get Kaida and Stella to assist you. They know those techniques and the ancient runic language. I will get to work then. Douglas set off to find a suitable stone slab, unbothered by the heavy rain and mud cloaks that clung to his legs. With that sorted, Ashlock returned to within the bastion as he still had something he wanted to confirm with Quill before his progeny Dominion skill wore off. Even though he could use it far more now as he had a way to heal soul damage, he still wished to avoid damaging his soul as much as possible. It wasn't like healing a cut. The strange emptiness and missing of oneself caused by soul damage was unnerving rather than painful. Inside the bastion, the ceiling was still smashed in from weathering heaven's wrath, and lumps of rock jutted out of the ink lake like icebergs. He would need to get Douglas to fix that next. Quill, I need to confirm something with you. As my offspring, did you inherit my demi-divine nature? Ashlock remembered that in Kaida's evolution message, it had stated, as a lesser evolution of the Midnight Inkwing, Kaida would inherit the blood of a divine being from the upper layers of creation, granting him unlimited cultivation potential. It would seem that being related to a divine being through blood, or sap in this case, resulted in unlimited cultivation potential, and he wondered if his offspring had inherited that from him. After a long while, Quill confirmed his thoughts. Yes, I have. So you have unlimited cultivation potential? Yes, just like father. What about divine ink? Is your ink chi divine? Kaida's evolution also mentioned turning his body into one of divine ink due to being a lesser version of the Midnight Inkwing, which gave him powers such as comprehending the heavenly intent behind written words in ink and making contracts overseen by the heavens. No, father, my ink is normal, I think, Quill replied as the ink on the surface of his trunk rippled to display the tree's thoughts. So no two divine beings are made the same. We just all share unlimited cultivation potential, Ashlock concluded. I am sorry, father. Quill wrote, and Ashlock realized he had fallen silent. Don't worry. I had half expected that to be the case, so there's nothing to be sorry about. Ashlock quickly replied before his offspring got the wrong idea. Let's try something out, though. Kaida can inscribe runic words into his scales. Would you be able to do the same to your bark? Kaida's entire body was made of divine ink, so he could change his body size at will, and losing a scale wasn't any more of a deal than spending some chi. However, Ashlock didn't see why Quill couldn't follow suit. He could regrow his bark, especially with Ashlock's S-grade skill Nocturnal Genesis boosting growth at night. I will give it a try, Quill wrote. The ink coating a section of his bark then shifted until it spelled out the ancient runic words for flash of light. The ink then began to slowly harden and fill with chi, and Ashlock was reminded of how it took a while for Kaida to inscribe his ink scales. Doesn't that make the bastion's attack really powerful then? Ashlock mused. It had fired almost instantly with the effect I told Quill to add. An hour or so passed, and the ink finally finished drying. Even when Quill withdrew his ink into his star core, those ancient runic words remained on Quill's bark. Alright, Quill. People are coming, so now is a great time to test it, Ashlock said, and he felt chi surge through the tree. The ink words glowed with power. The door to the room swung open, and Stella strode in with Diana, Douglas, Elaine, and Kaida in tow. Tree. Are you in here? The entire room lit up with a weak but blinding light that surprised the three intruders. Ag, what the hell? Stella cursed as she blinked away the light. Ashlock felt a wave of amusement from Quill. It seemed the ink tree and Kaida would get along as friends as they both enjoyed pranks. Chapter 234, Statues. Ashlock felt the prank was in good taste but still felt bad. What was that for? Stella complained to the ablaze tree in the center of the ink lake that Ashlock was inhabiting while shaking her fist. I apologize. I was testing Quill's ability to use ink chi, and we just so happened to conclude our test as you walked in, Ashlock said through abyssal whispers. Stella rolled her eyes as she paused at the shoreline. You know I felt your presence pass over me as I entered, right? I know when you are watching. She crossed her arms and seemed somewhat vexed. Don't lie to me. Fine, fine, Ashlock said, it was just a joke and a good test. You didn't even manage to react to the flash. Imagine if you had been an intruder. That would be a rather effective attack. Stella pursed her lips. That's true. I didn't feel any light chi until it hit me. See? It's a good job that we tested it. It would have been pointless if you knew it was coming. Ashlock tried to justify it as best he could and seemed to be slowly convincing Stella as she sighed. She was about to open her mouth to say something when she was interrupted by Kaida slapping his tail on the ground and laughing by hissing. Kaida, stop laughing. She was just about to forgive me, Ashlock said directly to the snake. He had been so close to forgiveness just for Kaida to piss her off even more. Look, she is glaring at you now. If you keep laughing, I won't return your books, you know. Stella looked deathly serious. Kaida buddy, Douglas pulled Kaida's head into a hug and whispered into the lindworm's ear, when she gives you that death stare, I would be careful. The last time she looked at me like that, I found myself hanging through a portal 1,000 meters up. What did you say? Stella looked between the two. Kaida stopped hissing and exchanged a look with Douglas. The two seemed to enter a brotherhood, and they fist-bumped each other. Who had taught Kaida how to do that? Was it Douglas when they had been building the floating platform earlier? Neither seemed willing to answer Stella's question. Kaida quietly slithered past her and into the rock-filled ink lake. Making sure to avoid splashing near Stella, who was standing on the shore in mostly white clothes, which Ashlock found rather brave. Maple, who had been sleeping on Stella's head, smacked her forehead before rolling over and back to sleep. Don't hit me. How am I being unreasonable? Stella grumbled as Kaida swam around the boulders in the ink lake and then curled his 10-meter-long body around Quill. The ink tree seemed to find the sensation of a divine ink lindworm wrapping around him rather pleasant, like a warm scarf. Ashlock decided to change the topic. Douglas, sorry to ask more of you, but would it be possible to fix this place up? The Tribulation destroyed much of the ceiling, and all these boulders are in the ink lake. No need to apologize, boss. This is my job, after all. Douglas raised his hand, and the purple gemstone of his telekinesis artifact lit up with power. Boulders began to float up toward the ceiling, and under Douglas's power, they softened like clay, and Douglas was able to gradually repair the massive hole in the ceiling. While he did that, Stella stopped making a scene and quietly went to place the books back on the shelf. Nobody else seemed to notice, but Ashlock saw how she had meticulously remembered where each book had been before. She then deposited the 8 large midnight inkwing eggs into the ink lake. Ashlock still needed to decide what to do with them as they showed no signs of hatching. I should let Larry eat at least one of them to see if it will enhance his S-grade evolution. Ashlock pulled on his tether with the spider, who was prowling through the trees on the mountain range, searching for any bounty hunters that may be lurking. Larry, come to the bastion in the center of the hole. Ashlock told the giant spider, I got a snack for you. It was almost funny how the spider suddenly looked excited as he crawled back to Red Vine Peak at high speed through the canopies. Hardly 10 minutes had passed when Larry arrived at the edge of the hole and was faced with something he had likely never seen before. A 5-meter-wide disc of stone covered in runic lines was docked in a circular cut into the side of the massive hole. Stand on that stone platform. It will carry you to the other side. Ashlock explained and then held back a laugh as he watched Larry apprehensively crawl onto the platform as if he were scared. Now put some chi into it, and the thing will move. Larry let out a strange growl in surprise when the stone platform glowed with power and lurched forward. It slowly floated across the 8,000-meter deep hole, and after half a minute, it had docked on the other side. Realistically, Larry could have jumped the 50-meter gap. But watching a giant spider traveling by a man-made floating platform was quite the spectacle. Larry made his way across the small open courtyard at the front of the bastion, which led into an empty entrance hallway with Kaida's cultivation cave behind thick wooden doors at the far end. Elaine opened the door for him, and he joined the others in the spacious cavern. Ashlock used telekinesis to float one of the 8 eggs over to Larry, which drew the confused gaze of everyone in the room. Eat this. It will help your upcoming evolution. If you encounter this story on Amazon, note that it's taken without permission from the author. Report it. Thank you, Master, for your consideration. You are most kind. Larry opened his maw and engulfed the ostrich-sized egg in a single bite, shell and all. A sickening crunch followed as Larry chewed the egg and swallowed. There was no system message confirming the consumption of divine flesh. Strange, why didn't it work? Ashlock wondered. Maybe he needs to eat more. Gloating over another egg, Larry happily devoured it much the same way as the first. Still, no message appeared. There are 6 eggs left. Worst case, eating these eggs gets Larry closer to his S-grade evolution, so this isn't a waste either way. Ashlock floated over another egg and then another. He kept going until Larry had eaten all but one of the eggs. Larry has consumed the flesh of a divine being. Ah. It worked. Ashlock cheered, and he still had one more egg to spare. I think leaving this one alone to see if it will hatch is best. He concluded while ignoring Kata's puppy eyes and hungry look. While Larry had been left out of the mystic realm to defend him, this greedy snake had eaten a divine scrambled egg buffet. It was only fair that Larry got priority here. Larry, I will make sure you get to enter the mystic realm this time, which opens in under 2 weeks. Ashlock told his loyal pet. Hopefully, you will be able to hunt enough prey to reach the S-grade evolution. So make sure to eat well. As master wishes, Larry bowed oddly toward the tree. Boss, should I leave a wider hole in the ceiling now that Quill has grown larger? Douglas asked, drawing Ashlock's attention. Now that Douglas pointed it out, Quill had grown during the short tribulation, so he was taller, and his canopy spread further. Yeah, leave it like this, Ashlock agreed, looking at the half-fixed roof. What should I do with the last few boulders littering the ink lake then? Douglas asked. The boulders were around a person's height and drenched in ink, which Douglas had been depositing back into the ink lake from the other boulders he used to fix the ceiling. Ashlock was about to tell him to rid them of ink and dispose of them when he remembered the empty hallway leading to Kata's area. He had planned to fill it with furniture and whatnot, but wooden statues made from stone enhanced the grandeur of the place. Would it be possible to make statues of all the main sect members in the hallway? Kaida could help you style them as they are covered in ink. Douglas grinned. That's an excellent idea. Who should I include? Stella, Diana, Elaine, Kaida, Larry, Maple, and you. Ashlock listed everyone important that came to mind. If enough stone is left over, make one for the Redclaw Grand Elder as well. Just make sure to leave enough room for future statues too. Got it. Douglas nodded and gestured for everyone to follow him with a hand wave. As much as I love you all, I haven't memorized all your faces and bodies. Wait, that sounds wrong, whatever. Just follow me. I need you to model for me. Elaine laughed as she followed him into the hallway, followed by the rest. Ashlock's gaze naturally followed via a route that went throughout the bastion's interior. Alright, since this is Kata's library, he can decide where he wants his statue, Douglas said to the group. Any objections? Nobody had any, and to their surprise, Kaida wanted his statue to be over the door's archway, so his head looked down from the top of the archway at those waiting in the hallway or walking through. Douglas's hands became wreathed in brown soul flames, and he got to work shaping the rock into a noodle-like shape while stealing glances at Kaida. Since the lindworm was 10 meters long, the rock wasn't enough to make a life-sized version, but that didn't matter. After 10 minutes of work, a very realistic ink-black stone head of Kaida was jutting out of the wall above the archway and gazing down at them with empty eyes. Looks kinda creepy, Stella commented, earning an angry hiss from Kaida. Hey, I was being honest. Oh, I know. Maybe put these inside the eye sockets. They match your eyes. Stella's spatial ring flashed with silver light, and 2 palm-sized glowing yellow stones appeared. What are these? Douglas asked as he took them from her. Stella shrugged. I bought them ages ago as reading lights. They weren't costly or anything, and I have more. Douglas put them into the empty eye sockets of the stone head, and Ashlock had to admit it completed the piece as the 2 glowing eyes now illuminated the hallway and drew focus. Okay, who is next? Douglas asked. As the first members of the sect, I think Stella and Diana should be on either side of the door, Ashlock suggested. I like that idea, Diana agreed. Which side do you want Stella? Right side. Stella went to stand by the archway and tried to strike a cool pose by crossing her arms. Deciding it wasn't quite giving the impression she wanted with Maple sleeping on her head, she picked the squirrel up and held him tightly in her arms. Alright, stay still, Douglas said as he sat down an ink-coated boulder beside them, and using his earth affinity, he began to morph it into a surprisingly accurate replica. What do you think of this? He said after a few minutes as he turned the statue around so Stella could get a good look. Do I really look like that? Stella squinted and began touching her face and then pinching her nose. Maybe I do. Strange. Kaida slithered over and added detail with his claw, such as shading. making the statue look scarily realistic. Douglas then picked the statue up with ease and carefully placed it where Stella had been posing, so it was to the right side of the doorway, and looked down into the hallway. "Does my smile always look that cruel?" Stella asked, "and why do I look crazy? Also, is Maple even able to breathe? I swear I wasn't holding him that tight." Everyone exchanged a look. "Anywho, Diana, you ready for yours?" Douglas said, ignoring Stella's question. "Sure," Diana replied as she also went and struck a pose. She had her right leg up against the wall and was holding a dagger, with its tip resting on her chin. Ashlock struggled to see Diana as the same person as before. She used to be a short girl with tomboyish black hair. But now she was taller with long black and blue hair that ran down her back and nails that curved into sharp claws. Perhaps smartly, she was hiding her fangs and wings from being in the statue, as that would give away her existence as a demon in case any foreign people were invited in here to see Kaida for whatever reason. Douglas and Kaida repeated the process they had done with Stella's statue, making it look shockingly realistic, and then Douglas placed it on the left side of the door. Up next was Larry, who wanted to be on the right near Stella. Meanwhile, Douglas and Elaine chose to have their statues beside one another on the left side near Diana, with Elaine sandwiched between them. With a leftover boulder, Douglas completed the right side with a statue from memory of the Redclaw Grand Elder and promised to make revisions if the man ever visited. "Now this looks way better," Douglas grinned at his own handiwork while standing at the entrance to the hallway. Especially Kaida's head over the archway and body slithering down the sides. "That was a good idea. You did great work as always," Ashlock agreed. "However, could you go into the city and purchase some shiny gemstones like the one Stella provided for Kaida's eyes? I think that would greatly improve them." "Sure, I can do that," Douglas nodded. Time till sundown, 3:54. With some time left until the end of the day, Ashlock wanted to figure out if he could teach Quill spatial techniques such as spatial lock, and he also wanted to ask Elaine more about void chi. "Elaine, can you stay behind? I want to ask you some questions, and I think your insight into ink chi could be useful." "Sure." Elaine seemed over the moon for being asked to help. Kaida and Elaine re-entered the cavern while everyone else left to fulfill their duties or cultivate. Chapter 235, A New Way to Learn. Ashlock enjoyed how peaceful the cavern within the Ink Bastion had become since everyone except Kaida and Elaine had left. Kaida lay beside the bookshelf built into the rock wall and flipped through a book. Ashlock had asked him why he didn't always input his chi into the words to gain heavenly insight, and the Lindworm's response had been a simple one. Apparently, it gave him a massive headache, and he used a considerable amount of chi to absorb a single page of content, so he would rather try and read it first. Which, in hindsight, made sense. There was no way directly absorbing heavenly insight into one's brain wouldn't come without drawbacks. Elaine was sitting casually on the shoreline of the Ink Lake as if she were at the beach. Ashlock didn't mind. He would prefer she felt relaxed and comfortable while they talked instead of standing all stiff and serious. "So you had a question for me?" Elaine asked. "Do you think it would be possible for Kaida or Quill to learn void techniques and then inscribe them into ink?" Ashlock suspected the answer was no, but he felt it was essential to check with an expert before jumping to conclusions. Elaine shook her head. "The void is all about stripping everything in time from reality. From my understanding, ink chi allows you to write a request to heaven for something to be manifest into reality in exchange for the spent ink chi. Since the void is everything that heaven is, no doubt heaven will be of much help regarding void techniques." "I feared that would be the case," Ashlock replied and then moved on to the next topic. "I was thinking of turning Quill into a sort of living defensive array. Not only to protect Kaida, the Midnight Inkwing Egg, and these books, but also the whole Red Vine Peak. Do you happen to know how defensive arrays usually work?" "That's a pretty good idea since Quill will be staying here. Let me think." Elaine fell into deep thought for a moment. Defensive arrays are usually specialized depending on the chi type of the operator or environment. You can also have defensive arrays serve wildly different purposes. For example, one surrounding a building with a shield would differ from an array that summons golems, but both would be considered defensive. "I see what you mean," Ashlock agreed. "What type of defensive array would you suggest Quill could imitate?" Elaine sat up straighter and seemed excited by the question. "Oh. Let's see. Since Quill has ink chi, he isn't limited by chi type. So he could easily summon golems, even though an array like that would usually be used by the Terraforge family, as the underlying techniques built into the array need earth chi to operate." Elaine bit her lip as she fell into thought again. With so many options, I suppose it's better to focus on what you want to defend from rather than focusing on the potential options. Good point, Ashlock said. What did he want Quill to be capable of doing? If he thought about how Stella had robbed the Azure clan library in the Pocket Realm, he should have Quill capable of stopping Stella. What was she capable of? Spatial step. Quill would need a way to stop someone from escaping this room until help can arrive, or I can personally kill them since this is near my trunk, and I might just have been distracted or something. Ashlock mused, so something like spatial lock would be good, but for that technique to work Quill needs to be of a higher cultivation realm than the intruder, and he is only in the first stage of the star core realm right now. So that might not work since he's too weak. Ashlock felt a wave of sadness from Quill, and then he realized he had been talking aloud to himself within Quill's soul so the tree could listen into his thoughts. Don't worry, but you will grow in strength soon enough, especially if you sleep well at night under the 9 moons. Ashlock reassured his offspring. He hadn't meant to make Quill feel depressed for not being enough. The poor tree was only a few weeks old, after all. Actually, wasn't he a surprisingly bright tree for being so young? He was the only one of his offspring capable of communication. Does ink chi contain the Tao of knowledge or something? Ashlock asked Quill. Wait, can you explain how you can understand me in the first place? The ink on Quill's trunk rippled, and words formed. I learned from father. You learned from me. Ow. I came from your seed. Inherited some knowledge. Ashlock thought back, and Quill had come from a seed he had shoved into a dead monster's stomach and then dumped in the ink lake. Did offspring spawned from his seeds differ from those that sprouted from his cursed sap? What else did you learn from me besides the ancient runic language? Ashlock asked while ignoring Elaine's confused expression as she read one half of the conversation from the shore. The ink rippled, and a new answer appeared. How to cultivate. You have my cultivation technique. Really? You know how to cultivate with the transpiration of heaven and chaos method? Yes. Quill replied through shifting ink. Interesting. Anything else? What about my resistance skills, like poison or fire resistance? There was a long delay before the ink rippled with an answer. My body knows how to resist poison and fire. Though it might differ from how father does it. Ashlock now remembered how Willow had been able to control a black vine covered in thorns to consume Nox's hand when Stella threw it to him. He hadn't thought much of it back then, but now. What about devouring things? Can you summon black vines to eat corpses? What about fruit and mushrooms? Can you grow them? Oh. Can you talk to others with abyssal whispers? Do you know telepathy? No, was all Quill replied to that string of questions. So it seemed his offspring inherited his more passive skills than his active ones. And if he used an active skill like consuming abyss through their body, they could take over control from him, much like with the bastion, which was also a skill of his. As interesting as this revelation was, he was getting sidetracked. As usual. Being trapped inside a stationary body fostered a bad habit of letting his mind do the wandering that his body never could. If you come across this story on Amazon, it's taken without permission from the author. Report it. Okay, all of that aside. Let's get back to the topic of teaching you techniques. Did you inherit my knowledge of spatial techniques such as warp strike or marking portals? Ashlock asked Quill. I don't know any techniques. I am sorry, father. Quill replied, accompanied by another wave of sadness. Was Quill easily made depressed or something? That's fine. It just means you have all the more to learn. Ashlock said as passionately as possible to uplift his offspring's mood. An unmotivated tree was a dangerously slothful existence, and since ink chi literally meant knowledge was power, he needed Quill to foster a love of learning. Ashlock felt Quill's mood raise, so he continued, okay, let me teach you about spatial lock as I feel that will be a useful place to start. Elaine waited to the side patiently. Judging by the constantly shifting ink on the tree's surface, Ashlock was engaged in a deep conversation with Quill, and she didn't dare interrupt. She could decipher half of the conversation due to learning to read the ancient runic language a few months ago. Still, she wasn't interested in eavesdropping once she figured out Quill wasn't talking to her, so she looked elsewhere. The calm ink lake looked beautiful as the late afternoon sunlight shone through the hole in the ceiling and onto Quill's scarlet leaves, giving the whole room a warm autumn glow. Minutes dragged on, and with no questions thrown her way, Elaine decided to get up and see what Kaito was doing. The snake had grown tremendously in the short time she had known him, and something about seeing a lindworm flipping through books and engraving things into his own scales was fascinating. Since she could read the ancient runic language, She could also decipher some of the technique names inscribed on his scales, and she was surprised when she didn't recognize most of them. Everything about this scene was ridiculous to her. Yet, it isn't the most ridiculous thing I have witnessed since joining the Ashlock sect. Elaine thought with a smile. She wasn't even sure what the most absurd thing she had seen was, but Ashlock was undoubtedly up there. Elaine had long seen through Ashlock's immortal persona that he presented the red clothes, and according to Douglas, he was just a spirit tree with a peculiar way of seeing the world. How a spirit tree was capable of so much in the Star Core realm still confused her to no end, but she wasn't about to question it. I suspect only Stella, who has known Ashlock since the beginning, may know the answer to his many mysteries. Elaine shuddered at the thought of asking that girl anything that might put Ashlock at risk. Stella was incredibly protective when it came to the tree hell. Stella openly admitted to advocating for Elaine's execution just because her overly curious uncle had caught wind of the tree's existence. "Hey, Kaida, what are you reading?" Elaine asked in a hushed tone to respect the tranquil environment. Kaida twisted his head away from the book he had his snout buried in to look at her and hissed softly, making Elaine realize a slight issue with her question. She had forgotten that Kaida couldn't speak. "Oh, sorry. Can I borrow one of your books?" Elaine gave an awkward smile as she tried to decipher Kaida's responses based on the tone of his hissing. Since the lindworm didn't seem adverse to her request, she picked a random book and got reading. As it turned out, Spatial Lock was not a good starting place. Quill turned out to be a fast learner, and within an hour, the smart tree had gotten the hang of chi resonance at a conceptual level, at least. But then an issue arose. As versatile as ink chi was, it had a requirement. Quill couldn't simply change the frequency of his soul ripples and match them to the others in the room like Ashlock could. He had to write his intent in ink and let the heavens handle it. "This is frustrating," Ashlock grumbled. "Reminds me of trying to get code to work. I would compile and run the code, and then I would have to wait 5 minutes for it to reach the point of the issue I just tried to fix, only to find it still broken and have to start all over again." It wasn't Quill's fault, but the tree would promise he understood what Ashlock was trying to teach him. He would then spend upwards of 10 minutes carving out his insights into his bark with ink, and upon activating the ink with his chi, it would not work as intended, and then Ashlock would have to figure out where the hell it went wrong. All of that aside, the hour had not been a total waste. Quill understood chi resonance and could write a request in ink to heaven to match his soul ripples with a target. Great. But that led Ashlock to a problem. Why did I pick to teach Quill Spatial Lock when I don't even fully understand it myself? Ashlock had used telekinesis to retrieve the Azure Clan book from the bookshelf, had it floating before Quill, and was trying to read it to him with little success. It was like the blind leading the blind. "Hey Kaida," Ashlock called out to the slothful lindworm who had been so smug earlier. "You learned how to use Spatial Lock, right? Come teach it to Quill for me." Ashlock wasn't so sure how Kaida would manage to teach Quill. But he was desperate at this point as he felt a headache coming on, and the day was nearing its end. Kaida snapped closed the book he was reading and, like an angry librarian, slowly slotted the book back on the shelf and turned to look at the tree sprouting from the ink lake. "Don't get grumpy with me. You and Quill should help each other out and become friends," Ashlock said. In his mind, he didn't want Quill to feel lonely, and since they shared an affinity, it only made sense that they shared knowledge and grew in strength together. Kaida let out an understanding hiss and slithered into the small lake that was more like a swimming pool in size. He soon reached Quill and wrapped around the tree's trunk. Ashlock was curious how Kaida planned to impart his knowledge, and to his surprise, the lindworm seemed to have an idea as he began to write something into Quill's bark with divine ink. It took a long time, but Ashlock hardly noticed the passage of time because he was mesmerized by the process. Eventually, Kaida pulled back his claw and admired his handiwork. Ashlock compared the many paragraphs of divine words written into Quill's bark as if he were a signpost at a national park. They matched those in the Azure Clan's book perfectly. So Kaida transcribed everything written in the book onto Quill's bark but in divine ink. "What's the point of this?" Ashlock mumbled to himself. "Wait. Quill, try to surge your chi into the words." Quill did as instructed, and the words lit up with a golden light, but instead of going into Kaida's brain, the heavenly words sunk into the tree and entered Quill's mind. You can do that." Ashlock shut up as he felt his soul fragment become overwhelmed with heavenly whispers. Unable to handle it, he pulled his focus away from Quill and back to his main body. "Whoa, what was that?" Ashlock was bewildered. By the experience, it felt like he was trying to piece his brain back together from a concussion. No wonder Kaida complained about a headache if he experienced that every time he used that heavenly insight skill. That aside, did this mean he now had a way to learn techniques instantly? If so, where is my knowledge about spatial techniques? Do I need to accept the torment and keep my focus on my soul fragment inside Quill? Ashlock wondered, but he wasn't willing to return even for the chance of learning spatial lock. It was that bad. He felt like heaven had taken a battle axe to his skull and chopped it open to shove information into the crack. A while passed, and Ashlock saw the sun dip below the distant horizon. He felt a sudden rush as his fragmented soul was pulled from Quill and forced to remerge as his progeny Dominion skill ran out. Suddenly, the deeper meaning behind the words in the Azure Clan technique book became crystal clear. His returning soul fragment had brought with it the complete spatial lock technique. In disbelief, Ashlock called on Elaine. "Yes, Patriarch, how can I help?" Elaine shouted as she stood on the floating platform and floated over. "I need you to gather as many technique manuals as you can. Get some from the Red Clothes and the Academy. You can also take a lump of spirit stones and try to buy some from anyone you can." Ashlock said. "Sure, I can do that. The books from the Academy will be a little harder to sneak out, but I can leverage my rank as a professor there to at least lend them out to me for a time. Is that okay?" "Yes, that works." Ashlock agreed. Kaida didn't damage the books when he used his heavenly insight technique, and it was best they avoided suspicion by robbing the Academy bear. Elaine nodded and left to gather the books he asked for. If Kaida could teach any technique to Quill, Ashlock would have Quill learn every defensive technique he could find. This place will become an impenetrable fortress that Ashlock could use to protect his precious sect members from harm. Chapter 236, Interlude, Escape. Nox sat in the reception room of the Void Mind residence that lorded over Slimer from the peak. Sunlight streaked through the large eastern-facing windows, which was unusual. Nox had done business with the Void Mind family and had visited Slimer a dozen times, yet this was the first time she had seen the distant land from this room. "I wonder what is going on," Nox murmured as she took a sip from the tea provided. It was the fifth one she had gone through in the 9 hours she had been made to wait so far. Quite frankly, if not for her dire need to see a void cultivator to purge this curse from her soul, she would have raised a ruckus for being made to wait so long. "It took me a week of travel to get here, so a short rest was appreciated, but this is getting ridiculous." The lock to the grand door of the waiting room clicked open, and a servant walked in. Nox held back from giving the man a harsh glare. "Is someone finally free to see me?" Nox asked as calmly as she could. However, the now near-empty teacup in her hand cracked in two when the man shook his head. "Sorry, merchant, none of the elders are free to see you today." The man dared to give her a raised brow at the shattered teacup at her feet. "You made me sit here for an entire day and expect me to accept such an outcome." Nox rose from her seat. "I have done business with the Void Mind family for years. How can there not be a single void cultivator willing to see me? What is going on? I demand an explanation. War with the Skyren family is on the horizon due to Dante Voidmind's failure." The servant explained in a harsh tone. "All of the elders are in closed-door cultivation to prepare. I asked around all day for you, but nobody seemed interested in wasting their precious void chi on helping a poor merchant when they could use that void chi to save themselves and this family from destruction." Nox felt her eye twitch. Would it have been so hard to explain this to her from the start? "Feel free to wait as long as you like in case an elder becomes available, but I would advise you to return in 2 months when the war ends." The servant turned to leave. "If not, you know the way out." Nox watched the door close with irritation. The Void Mind servants were known to be brash with outsiders, but that was clear disrespect. Just because I could not offer an exorbitant upfront payment, they treat me like this. Nox cursed as she looked at her freshly healed hand with a single golden spatial ring containing a few emergency pills she had purchased from the Lotus Informat. Cultivators often used spatial rings to gauge another's wealth quickly, so the fact she had a single golden spatial ring showed she was dirt poor. Nox let out a long sigh to calm down and looked out the window. To think the Void Mind family is going to war, though. Wouldn't such an event force the Blood Lotus sect's patriarch to make a move? There's no way a war between two pillar families of the sect can go ahead. Right? War aside, that didn't help Nox's problem. Despite the Celestial Warden's best efforts, he could not find a way to purge the curse festering in her infant nascent soul. She needed the help of a Void Mind Elder. although I could wait for the war to end. Right now, I am effectively crippled. My cultivation can't advance, and I am wasting chi suppressing the curse from spreading from my infant nascent soul into my soul and body. I also have little wealth to my name, especially if someone manages to kill Stella Crestfallen, and I have to bid farewell to my 6,000 Yingxi coins. Nox looked at the mountain range to the east with the smog gone. She could see the silhouette of the red vine peak, where she had become cursed. This was all that bastard Stella's fault. Deciding to leave the room she had been trapped in for 9 hours to clear her head, Nox exited and walked down the long, empty corridor, lost in thought. I can't return to the Tainted Cloud sect without getting this sorted. There is nothing the Celestial Warden can do for me. Let's see, I have 2 options here. Either I wait around at this residence in a desperate hope that a void cultivator will help me, or I somehow gather enough wealth to tempt an elder to help me. Nox paused mid-stride as an idea came to mind. What if I went and killed Stella? That would nullify the bounty, and I would have my 6,000 Yingxi coins returned, giving me enough wealth to convince an elder to help me. Yes, that could work. Excuse me, merchant. A sudden voice broke Nox from her thoughts. Turned around and saw a black-haired man with the distinct features of the Void Mind family. Searching her memory, she matched a name to the face. Jasper Voidmind. Nox's eyes widened. He wasn't the most talented or well-connected member of the Void Mind family's younger generation, but that didn't matter. He had Void Chi, and that was all she needed. If you are still looking for help, I have someone who wishes to meet you, Jasper said in a hushed tone, and his eyes seemed shifty. Who? Dante Voidmind, Jasper replied with a strained smile. That name reminded Nox that, according to the servant, it was Dante Voidmind's failure that caused this war to break out and was, therefore, the source of her problems. If anything, she would love to punch him in the face and give him a piece of her mind. Is there no chance you could help me with my problem? Nox asked. I will be indebted to you and can. Jasper raised his hand to silence. Absolutely not. My void chi is far too precious to waste on such a thing when I might have Skyrend bastards hurling lightning bolts my way soon. I would curse your name to the afterlife if I ran out of chi while trying to block an attack. Fine, Nox understood their apprehension about helping her. What was her promise of repaying a debt worth when facing the Skyrend family in battle? Not much. Take me to see Dante Voidmind. Dante kept stealing glances at the training room's door. He had caught wind of a well-known merchant willing to trade a favor for assistance with something that required void chi. Since he had no need to upkeep his void chi for the upcoming war, as it would only start with his capture in 2 months, he was willing to trade his precious void chi for any help. Dante stood up and looked at both his arms, which had been replaced with silver prosthetics. Much to his mother's horror, he had meticulously chopped off and replaced parts of his body one by one with silver that had runic void gathering arrays inscribed into them. Thanks to replacing both arms, legs, half his face, and his chest with silver, he had soared up 2 stages of cultivation in a single month and felt unstoppable. I have just reached the 5th stage of the Star Core realm, so I have some chi to spare for a worthwhile trait. I had hopes to reach the peak of the Star Core realm before the year's end and challenge my father to death, but this pace is too slow. 2 stages in 1 month seem to be my limit with all these runic augments, and it will only slow from here, so the highest I can reach is around the 8th stage of the Star Core realm at best. With his grand plan of killing his own family off the table, Dante had 2 options left. Clear his name by finding the Void Monster, or run for the hills and wait for his inevitable death as the Void Mind Elder, and even his father will hunt him to the end of the realm. I have brought the merchant as requested, Dante, Jasper called out as the door creaked open. Dante had been abandoned by everyone since news of his failure got out, but to his surprise, Jasper, who had irritated him so much in the past, had stuck by his side. Even now, Dante couldn't understand the guy. This content has been misappropriated from Royal Road. Report any instances of this story if found elsewhere. A tall woman shrouded in layers of black robes entered the room and spoke gruffly. Greetings, Dante Voidmind. My name is Nox. I have done a lot of business with your family over the years and came seeking a favor in a time of need, which I will naturally return in the future. Let's cut to the chase. We are both busy people with little time to waste. Dante spoke seriously. What do you need me to do? Nox fell silent momentarily before her shadow moved and swung around to her front. Her shadow then slowly stood up as if it were a person emerging from the ground and faced Dante. What is this? Dante asked with confusion. Look a little closer. Dante did as suggested, and only now did he see what appeared to be black roots spreading throughout the shadow, which he had mistaken as veins. I was cursed due to eating a pill provided to me by someone, Nox explained. I managed to transfer the curse to my infant nascent soul, but without this curse being purged by void chi, I have no way to keep cultivating. For her to resort to void chi to purge it, it must be one without a known counter. Dante concluded. Who gave you the pill? Dante asked. Something about these black roots was ticking him off. They seemed eerily similar to those of the demonic trees-infested Darklight City. Nox remained silent to his question, so he added, was it someone near Darklight City, perhaps? How did you know? Nox asked. Her tone was defensive. Merchants are always so skeptical of everything, though I suppose that's how they survive so long. Dante mused as he stepped away from inspecting the standing shadow. Dante pulled back the sleeve of his cloak and showed his silver arm. I don't know what the others have told you, but I was framed. My father asked me to seize control of Darklight City from the Redclaws during an alchemy tournament they were hosting. There, I noticed an infestation of demonic trees with roots similar to those throughout your shadow. I see. Nox shifted a little closer. Would the name Rosalind or Stella mean anything to you? Dante felt 1,000 puzzle pieces fall into place. Somehow, everything strange that had occurred recently came back to that woman. Rosalind was present in the alchemy tournament and represented the Redclaws. Dante rubbed his chin. She had a mysterious background. There were rumors that she was connected to the Celestial Empire, as she knew the recipe for a pill only made there. Dante explained as he began pacing the room, his silver legs clinking on the stone floor. I commanded my elders to capture Rosalind at the end of the tournament, but they all ended up dead after chasing her. Then the Skyren Scions were also murdered, and their deaths were pinned on me. Hence, the war became set to begin, and I lost my darn arm to the void. So we have the same enemy, Nox said as she withdrew her hood. Black hair fell over a skull mask that concealed her face. Rosalind, also known as Stella Crestfallen, is the one who hid this horrific curse within a pill. I ask you to use your void chi to eradicate the curse from my infant nascent soul. Dante eyed the standing shadow. That is acceptable, but damage to the soul will be unavoidable. Won't losing so much progress in your cultivation be a major setback? Nox waved him off, and he noticed her single golden spatial ring. Just how far had this merchant fallen? Not worth worrying about. I can recover my cultivation within a month. So what do you want as a favor in return? That was a good question. Dante despised his family right now, but that was only because they didn't respect him. If he could clear his name by finding his uncle and that void beast and reverse the war, their judgment would become less clouded, and they would be able to see how great he was once more. I need help tracking down a void beast to prove my innocence. A void beast. Nox seemed surprised. That will be difficult. Void chi would make it impossible to track down, and facing a feral creature able to wield the void would be far too dangerous and chi intensive. I can't guarantee success. Do you have any details about this void beast at least? Like where it was the last seen, and how strong it is? It has been spotted numerous times around this region, but it was last reported to have attacked the Skyren family and wiped out half of their cultivators in a single night. Nox laughed in his face as if he were a fool. Yeah, there's no way I am going after something that dangerous when I can just wait a few months for one of your elders to help instead. I will take my leave if that is all you wish to ask of me. Wait. Those are fair points. Dante gritted his teeth. He hated it, but he needed this woman's help. In truth, I have also been apprehensive about tracking the beast down, and the little I have tried has yielded no results. The darn thing is like a ghost. It was improper of me to request such a thing, so I have another proposal. Help me get away from here and set up a new life. Though I must warn you, the servants are watching my actions, and the elders can track me down if I try to escape, so that complicates matters. Oh. Nox crossed her arms. Now. That's something I can certainly do. Though I am a little short of money at the moment. That's going to be an issue, Dante muttered under his breath. I spent everything I had on these silver augments. I have friends in high places in the Tainted Cloud sect west of here. I could take you there and help you start a new life. Don't fret the small details. Dante liked the sound of the plan but was suspicious of Nox following through with it once her curse was lifted. Turning to his friend waiting by the door, Gasper, you have bore witness to this deal, yes. Go to a safe room. If I escape with Nox tonight and don't send you a confirmation message through a communication talisman that I have settled down in the Tainted Cloud sect within the next month, have Mother ban Nox from setting foot near Slimer and send the elders to hunt her. Understood. Jasper looked between the two and nodded. You can depend on me, Dante. With that, he left in a hurry. Nox clicked her tongue. A cautious one, aren't you? I find the terms agreeable, Dante said, ignoring her comment. I will now try and purge this curse from your shadow, and once that is done, we will leave this place together. Right? Nox nodded, so Dante got to work. He placed his hands on the shadow's chest where the vines seemed densest and began inserting void chi into the infant nascent soul. Nox started to scream at the top of her lungs as the void chi ate away at her infant soul. Just bear with it. The roots seem to be originating from one location, Dante said as his void chi carved deeper into the shadow. The seed. Nox gasped out, kill. A seed. Dante wasn't entirely sure what Nox was referring to, but he was sure to find out as his void chi efficiently eradicated the roots, slowly squirming inside the shadow. Every few seconds that passed cost him a day's worth of stored up chi, so Dante pressed forward with little regard. The roots seemed to lash out aggressively and swarmed around a central point. He soon reached within the shadow's chest where the heart should be. Oh, I see the seed now. Dante eradicated the last of the roots tightly wrapped around and protecting the seed. Feeling the strain on his own star core, he tried to obliterate the seed in one go, but it resisted. What? Dante blurted out as he wrapped the seed and his void chi, yet it refused to disappear. No matter how much void chi he surged into the black seed, Nox only screamed louder, and the seed remained unfazed. It was the first thing he had ever encountered that was void immune. Withdrawing from the shadow, he saw a tiny root sprout from the tip of the seed. Dante reeled back horrified. His skin crawled, thinking the seed might have spread to him somehow. What a nasty curse, he said as Nox finally stopped screaming at the top of her lungs and collapsed to the floor. It's void immune. I've never seen such a thing. Nox recovered quickly and managed to suppress the root's growth with her own chi. Shit, the seed is fucking void immune. Nox cursed out, gripped her head in both hands and pulled at her hair. She then began to manically speak to herself. What can I do? This is all Stella's fault. Kill Stella. Ow. Too strong. Ag. Fuck. How can it be immune to the void? Dante stood there bewildered. Nox turned to Dante in a rage. How is this possible? Tell me how. The void is supposed to consume all. I don't know. Dante suspected that the curse could be of a divine origin, but he didn't wish to disclose that as it wouldn't help his chances. This crazy woman was his ticket out of here, and he had wasted weeks of chi and failed to purge her curse. Why don't you go and ask Stella to remove it? Dante suggested, or at least ask her how to dispel it. Stella. Yes. What a great idea. Nox removed her mask and showed her bloodshot eyes. I'll rip this curse out and shove it through her skull and then watch as her corpse turns into a fucking tree from the inside and see how she likes it. Right? And you are going to help me. Nox stood up and grabbed his arm with gorilla strength. Lead me to a void chamber. Why? Dante dared ask. So I can ascend to nascent soul away from the heaven's wrath. Nox tightened her grip. With the condition of my infant soul, it will only take a few days to recover, and then I will start the ascension process. But the curse. Are you sure that's a good idea? I have no other choice. If the void can't help me, then nobody in this realm except for Stella has a chance of knowing how to remove it, and there's no way she will tell me how without some brute force. And for that, I need to ascend. I am too weak as I am right now. Nox said confidently, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. I promise once I kill that bitch and rid myself of this curse, I can take you back to the Tainted Cloud sect and help you escape this place. Doesn't that sound nice? Dante slowly nodded. Freedom aside, he also wouldn't mind if Rosalind, who he was convinced played a significant role in his framing, died. But what about the elders who will follow me if I try to escape? Dante asked. They will interfere with our fight to rid yourself of the curse. Nox flashed a crazed grin. Good. If you throw yourself at an enemy, you will have the void mind elders flock to your rescue. Use them as meat shields. You are far more valuable to them alive rather than dead. Dante felt it rather fitting for him to command those who turned their backs on him to their deaths. All in all, this seemed like a perfect plan. Chapter 237, Winter Nostalgia. Another day has passed already. Ashlock stifled a yawn as his body slowly woke up. Perhaps it was due to the long winter nights that he spent slumbering under the 9 vertical moons, but he felt like time was flowing faster than usual. If not for his system notifying him of each passing day, he would blink, and a week would pass. Idolatry daily sign-in system. Day, 3587. Daily credit, 24. Sacrifice credit, 1095. Sign-in. As usual, with the rising sun over the distant mountain range, his sign-in system appeared with the addition of a daily credit. Over a week had passed since he created the Ink Bastion, and there hadn't been any bounty hunters that had tried their luck to help refill the 1,000 sacrificial credits he had spent on its creation. Wait, wasn't something happening soon? What was it? Ashlock yawned loudly as he sleepily glazed over the annoying system notification that had awoken him. Oh yeah. When did the Mystic Realm open again? Ashlock wondered as he brought up his skill menu. Demonic Demi-Divine Tree, Age, 9. Star Core, 8th Stage. Soul Type, Amethyst, Spatial. Mutations. Demonic IB. Blood Sap C. Summons. Ashen King, Laria. Midnight Ink Lindworm, Kaida B. Skills. Skyborn Bastion SSS. Necroflora Sovereign SS. Mystic Realm S locked until day, 3589. Progeny Dominion S. Dimensional Overlap S. Nocturnal Genesis S. Eye of the Tree God A. Abyssal Whispers A. Deep Roots A. Magic Mushroom Production A. Lightning Chi Barrier A. Chi Fruit Production A. Consuming Abyss B. Blooming Root Flower Production B. Language of the World B. Fire Chi Protection B. Transpiration of Heaven and Chaos B. Superior Poison Resistance C. Ashlock didn't check his skill menu too often, but looking down the long list of mutations, summons, and especially skills that appeared in his vision helped him quantify just how much he had grown in power in such a short time. Merely a year ago, he had been stuck writing out his thoughts with a stick on the ground, and now he could command a fleet of flying islands and speak into people's minds. Hold on, if I remember correctly, wasn't I in the early stages of the Soul Fire realm at the start of this year? Yet many months later, I am now at the peak of the Star Core realm. Ashlock could only wonder how strong he would become within the next decade if this was the speed of growth his system made him capable of in a single year. I suppose trees really are suited to cultivation. Though I am also cheating a little. Ashlock chuckled as he did the maths between his 2 system screens and quickly realized that the Mystic Realm would open again in 2 days. If not for the Mystic Realm, with its time dilation and dense chi in addition to the insane cultivation resources I can grow, I fear those around me would fall behind in cultivation considering my speed. Though I suppose my rate of acquiring new skills will slow down as it becomes harder to find strong enough opponents to kill for sacrificial credits. Speaking of his sect members, Ashlock glanced around while a cold winter breeze rustled his leaves. It was still early in the morning, so all he saw was the deathly silent mountain peak. Stella and Diana were quietly cultivating under their respective trees. Douglas was thousands of meters down in the citadel with the mudcloaks, busy directing them on construction. Meanwhile, Elaine was cultivating her illusion chi in a grove on the mountain range. This is how it should be, Ashlock murmured as his mind finally escaped the clutches of slothfulness and kicked into gear. Peace and quiet. No world-ending threats or armies at the base of the mountain. Just cultivators meditating and the world going by. Of course, the threat of the bounty hunters was still looming over Stella's head, but that was being taken care of. One of the advantages of building up his sect and allies over the last year is he could sit back while his sect members did the dirty work. He had the Red Clothes scouring Darklight City for any suspicious people who may be bounty hunters, and if any of these bounty hunters somehow avoided the Red Clothes and tried to scale the mountain to reach Stella, the weaker ones were killed before they knew what hit them by Chaos or one of his other ants. Yet despite the rare quiet period, Ashlock had not been lazy. Or should he say Quill hadn't been lazy? He certainly had been due to the cold and new incentive to sleep as much as possible, but his new Star Core offspring had developed a thirst for knowledge that he appreciated. Before I check up on Quill's progress of learning those new techniques from the books Elaine got him, I suppose I should see if the forest to the east has developed much overnight. Ashlock's vision blurred as he went many miles out to the east where the battle with Nox had occurred 3 weeks ago. A few days ago, his roots had reached this area. Back then, it looked like a wasteland with only a few small shoots and leaves sprouting from the scorched and cratered land. However, The forest was proliferating thanks to nocturnal genesis boosting the growth of everything within his root network. There should be a fully grown demonic forest here by the end of the year, Ashlock mused as his view flew over the landscape, and he caught sight of a few monsters trampling his babies and munching on their freshly grown leaves. Bastards. Unauthorized reproduction, this story has been taken without approval. Report sightings. Since his root network had now reached this area, he could open portals in the sky and rain hell from above, but due to the vast distance between here and his star core, it would cost far more chi than it was worth to kill a few critters. After all, he was trying to conserve his chi to reach the nascent soul realm as soon as possible. Returning to Red Vine Peak, he knew just the man. Tree for the job. Willow, are you awake? Ashlock asked his spatial tree offspring, who commanded his attack-orientated bastion. A wave of agreement followed, reminding Ashlock that Willow wasn't quite as capable as Quill at communication. Could you deal with these monsters for me? However, be careful not to harm your baby siblings in the process. Okay. After a wave of agreement, Ashlock mentally transferred the general area he wanted Willow to go to and opened a large portal, so Willow wouldn't take a whole day to travel there. Someone shouted as Willow became a beacon of power, and the bastion began to float away from the mountain peak. Are you going to hunt monsters? Diana glided across the mountain peak with a single flap of her majestic raven wings and landed before Ashlock in a hurry. Mind if I tag along? Just cultivating water chi puts my body out of balance, so hunting some monsters for demonic chi would be helpful. Didn't you gain a new demonic mist affinity? Ashlock asked through abyssal whispers. Diana nodded, yeah, but there is no demonic mist here. Cultivating the untamed chi and converting it into demonic mist chi within my star core is far slower than if I focus on cultivating water and demonic chi and then combining them. That was a problem. Ideally, Ashlock wanted all his core sect members to have a place to cultivate their chosen chi type. I suppose I should make a bastion for you next so you have a place to cultivate this demonic mist chi. No, Diana shook her head, I wouldn't wish to trouble the patriarch. You have already been too generous and helped my cultivation soar by leaps and bounds. Diana, don't misunderstand, your strength is my strength. I would be more troubled if you fell behind the others and became a liability rather than a pillar of strength for the Ashfolin sect. Besides, you aren't some random sect member. I consider you more a dear friend or even family. You have fought to the death for me and others despite no obligation to do so. No oath or technique forces your loyalty. You have wanted to help me and Stella since the beginning, so let me do the same. Diana seemed lost for words. Sorry. It must have come across as if I was denying your good graces. Recomposing herself, Diana gave a fang-filled smile. But if you are offering, I would love anything that would help me cultivate demonic chi. Diana glanced at Stella, who was peacefully cultivating under a spatial affinity tree. Otherwise, how else will I catch up to that prodigy? I bet she would disagree with that assessment. Ashlock chuckled, you have no idea how much she has whined about how much cooler your bloodline is than hers. Diana shook her head in defeat. The young don't understand that comparison is the thief of joy. My demonic form caused me to be stuck in the soul fire realm for years due to my body being racked with corruption, and I had stunted development until recently. She raised her hand, and demonic mist came pouring out. Now that I have finally found the root of the issue, my chi was replaced with one that doesn't appear naturally in this realm, and I have become a half-demon. Without your help, I would have died in the soul fire realm. To be jealous of me feels ridiculous. Indeed, it's easy to look at one's achievements and become jealous of them without knowing what it took to get there. Ashlock agreed as the cold breeze picked up and made some of his weaker branches creak in the gale. Though that's not to say Stella had an easier time growing up. I can understand why she finds it hard not to compare herself to others without looking at the big picture. I am sure the Grand Elder would cough up blood if he knew Stella thought her cultivation speed was too slow and she was falling behind. Diana covered her mouth as she laughed. Anyway, you better get going. The longer I hold open this portal, the more chi I waste, Ashlock said as Willow slowly passed through the portal. Thank you, and I appreciate you wanting to help me. I really do. Diana flexed her wings, and with a single flap, she rocketed over the mist wall enshrouding the peak and landed beside Willow on the bastion surface. I will look into making a bastion for you, Ashlock said. However, with only 1,000 credits to his name, that would have to wait. Perhaps the next time you go to a place with that demonic mist chi, try to pick some flowers for me. I can make a grove for you that way until you have your own bastion. Will do. Diana waved to him as she was swallowed by the portal along with the rest of the bastion. The large portal snapped closed a second later, sending a gust of wind that briefly dispersed the mist wall and ruffled Stella's hair. Luckily, that didn't seem enough to pull her out of deep meditation. I guess I should check on Quill now, Ashlock mused as his vision blurred as he traveled through his roots and appeared near the ink lake. He could use progeny dominion on the tree, but even with his ability to heal his soul, overuse of the ability was a bad idea. Quill had grown considerably in such a short time, with his trunk already 2 meters through the hole in the ceiling, meaning his canopy was now fully exposed above the bastion. Which came with some positives and negatives. Positives were that the ink tree got more sunlight, furthering his development, and perhaps more importantly, Quill could now survey the whole mountain peak and fire off techniques without destroying the bastion in the process. The disadvantage was, of course, being exposed. If a stray attack shot from afar managed to take him out, that would be less than ideal. Ashlock briefly glanced at Quill's bark and could see that he had concentrated most of his new techniques near his canopy, and Ashlock knew they were a mixture of fire, nature, ice, and spatial techniques. He had hoped for a wider variety, but Elaine could only borrow books from the library that weren't in demand by any cultivators. Despite technically being under the Redclaw's rule, the Academy was an entity that spread across the whole of the Blood Lotus sect and was required to have facilities for the cultivators of all the noble families. So, Elaine had returned a week ago with books for nature and ice affinities as the 2 families that specialized in those had mysteriously vanished in the last few years. She had also got a stack of fire technique manuals from the Redclaws, who had apparently been more than happy to help. Weirdly, the Academy claimed there was still a demand for water affinity books by a few students, so Elaine could not get her hands on those donated to the Academy by the Ravenborn family. Though having access to 4 different affinities isn't too bad, and Elaine told me she had purchased an Earth Affinity Technique manual with spirit stones since Douglas had sold his years ago, so that will help both Quill and Douglas. Ashlock mused. He could likely get his hands on more techniques through the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion, but this many technique manuals were already enough. Quill was just like Ashlock. He couldn't read and comprehend technique manuals within hours through heavenly insight, he had to do it the old-fashioned way. Dreaded studying. So unless Kaida gained heavenly insight first and then transcribed the technique onto Quill's bark, he would be unable to learn it quickly. Considering after weeks, I could only grasp a mere part of the spatial lock technique, I believe it would take Quill, who is an intelligent tree, but ultimately just a tree and not one with a human mind like me, years to learn a single technique to the point where he could inscribe it into ink. Luckily, they had Kaida to help speed up that process, which also created a bottleneck. Kaida could only handle reading and transcribing so many techniques, and it also set back his own cultivation, so he was less than thrilled to do so. However, through some begging, Ashlock managed to get Kaida to teach him through Quill the spatial lock techniques and another called spatial repulsion, a technique that forcefully distorted space around him in a pulse, which was ideal for pushing away enemies to gain more time. Ashlock had picked these 2 techniques because they were defensive and would be ideal for him and Quill to learn. So now, on top of my system unlocked skills, I have mastered portal creation, spatial lock, warp strike, and spatial repulsion. It is not a bad list, though there are so many more I want to learn, such as spatial blades and time dilation, spatial compression, anchor seal, and spatial perception. Sadly, he had to give Kaida some breathing room to recover and some time for Quill to learn techniques from other affinities to diversify their defensive strategies. Luckily, since Ashlock was an immortal being unfazed by the passing of time, he had all the time in the world to learn these techniques and many more in the future. Now let me see what techniques Quill has inscribed so far. Ashlock studied Quill's bark. It had only been a little over a week, so despite transcribing these techniques at maximum speed, there were only a few so far. For ice affinity, there is just one I can see called Chill Aura. Then, for nature affinity, there are regenerative bark and vine entanglement. Oh, here is a fire affinity one called Flame Wart. Ashlock searched the rest of Quill's bark but could only find a single shard of bark inscribed with spatial lock and spatial repulsion. Not too shabby for only a week of progress. Ashlock withdrew his presence from the bastion and wondered what else he should do today. Sleep and a bit of cultivation were tempting, but there was one other place he liked to check on occasionally. His roots had reached Slimer, the nearest city. He had already infiltrated the streets of the lower city and was soon going to begin climbing up the mountain with the goal of sneaking a route into the Void Mind family's residence at the top. Blurring his vision as he used Eye of the Tree God to zoom over the land and arrive at Slimer, he noticed something was strange. It had been nothing but blue skies over Red Vine Peak, yet Slimer suffered under a violent storm that blanketed the sky and unleashed lightning strikes on the whole mountain. Were they under attack by the Skyrend family, or was something else causing such an abnormally fierce storm? Chapter 238, Interlude, Ascension. The Void Mind residence had descended into a sudden chaos. Dante paused his hurried steps and glanced out the floor-to-ceiling window that gave him a good view of Slimer, which spoled down the mountain and into the valley below. A sudden flash dazed him, followed by roaring thunder that shook the entire Void Mind residence. She must have begun her ascension already, Dante thought as he pulled his cloak tighter around his body to conceal his metal body from the servants who rushed past without even giving him a second look, something that would have enraged him in the past, but now he couldn't be more thankful for being overlooked. Confused shouts echoed through the hallways as doors slammed open, and the elders left their void chambers. Dante kept himself pressed against the window and faced away from his confused family. He almost felt like laughing as he saw hundreds of lightning bolts rain down on the land governed by his family, obliterating buildings and setting the world aflame. This is what you bastards deserve for turning your back on me. Humiliation. Thankfully, he resisted laughing at the destruction of the mortals under his family's protection as a nearby door swung open, and a man he hadn't seen in weeks appeared. His father man's piercing gaze swept the area as the chilling void wreathed his fingers. Dante pulled his cloak tight and kept his head low to try and blend in with all the servants rushing around. He had no desire for his father to take an interest in his silver augments or his explosive growth in cultivation. In fact, running into his father was the worst possible outcome right now. What in the Nine Realms is going on? His father roared at the elder to his side after making it to the window and observing the same sight that had almost reduced Dante to laughter. Are we under attack? Did the Skyrends ignore the orders of Grand Elder Valander and attack us before the 3-month grace period has ended? My lord, we have no idea, the elder answered respectfully. We were all in closed-door cultivation until a moment ago and are still assessing the cause, but I do suspect the Skyrends may have taken it a step too far. His father gashed his teeth as another barrage of lightning illuminated the world before smashing down onto Slimer with a god's fury. These bastards have no fear of the Patriarch if they will attack this blatantly. I will send a message to Grand Elder Valander and the Nitro's family regarding this incident. Meanwhile, you two need to fuel the defensive arrays. But my lord, the cost to defend the entire city from this much lightning will be astronomical. One of the elders protested. We should concentrate on defending our residents and the precious void gathering arrays. Everything else should be ignored. The city and mortals are replaceable. Are you a fool? When did I ever say anything about protecting the mortals? His father shouted, let them perish. With the beast tide coming and the Patriarch announcing there will only be one trip to the new sect lands, I do not care for them. A light culling is fine. Both elders bowed, as you command, Grand Elder. They both vanished with void step, leaving Dante alone in the hallway with his father as the servants had also made themselves scarce. He had debated vanishing along with them, but there was no way his father wouldn't notice him trying to run. There was a tense silence before his father began to walk over slowly. His expression was fierce and made all the more menacing by the thunderclaps accompanying his steps and the flashes of lightning illuminating one side of his face. Dante, it's been over a month since Grand Elder Valander visited, yet you waste your limited days in the training hall and bedroom. His father's voice was colder than the void, and Dante subconsciously shivered. Are you hoping to fight your way out of this? Look out the window. Do you see the destruction the Skyrends can wield? How do you plan to fight against the wrath of the heavens? Why are you so sure it's the Skyrends? Dante said without thinking, but before he could retract his statement, he found himself choking in his father's grasp around his neck. As he was lifted from the ground and felt his legs uselessly swinging, he was reminded of his father's monstrous strength. Dante, stop deluding yourself. There are only two reasons there. Would be a storm of this magnitude concentrated over our city. Either someone is ascending, or we are facing the wrath of the Skyrend family. The grip tightened and threatened to snap his neck. You and I both know my brother never discovered a way to ascend to the nascent soul realm, nor is anyone from the younger generation projected to reach the star core realm within the next few years. I know you went on a power trip and killed the Skyren science. Stop trying to deny it. The Void Beast. Dante gasped out. It was the Void Beast or uncle. Not me. I could never. Where the fuck is this Void Beast, Dante? Have you even attempted to search for it? Dante found himself viciously tossed to the ground with his father towering over him and dusting off his hand as if he had touched something dirty, his own son's neck. The truth of the matter is, your death was sealed the day Grand Elder Valander arrived with the war declaration. Father, do you really think I would do something so foolish? Dante said as he still felt the chilling grip of his father around his neck. It does not matter what I believe. You have been accused of killing 2 Scions, which alone isn't enough to start a war, but then Thunderhold Peak was attacked by that void monster. Our affinity is rare, Dante, and 2 such significant events happening back to back with the involvement of our affinity is too suspicious. His father turned his back and began to walk away, innocent or guilty, it matters not. The Skyren family has been at our necks for decades and is only kept in check by the Patriarch's rules. These rules have protected our family from annihilation until now. The man paused his steps and glanced over his shoulder. If it's between abiding by the rules to avoid a war or breaking them to save your life, I hope you forgive me for the option I must choose for the family's greater good. Stolen from its original source, this story is not meant to be on Amazon. Report any sightings. Dante staggered to his feet. Forgive you. You tell me it's hopeless that my fate is already sealed. But then treat me like a fool for training hard day in and out in the hope of a better tomorrow. What would you do in my situation, father? Lay over like a wounded dog for those heaven-worshipping freaks to smite me? Or train like crazy in hopes of a longer life? I am starting to think you want me dead. His father's eye twitched before turning away. Instead of wasting your time on a futile effort, why don't you go and use that chi we wasted so many resources on and power one of the void arrays? It's the least you could do for us. Dante held back his rage. It would be my honor to serve this family until my final day. Good. I knew I raised an obedient son. Was all his father said before he vanished elsewhere with Void Step. If you know I am obedient, why do you believe I went against orders and killed the Scions? Dante thought as he straightened his back, and with a stoic expression, he moved through the hallways toward one of the defensive arrays that were furthest from the others. It was rather pointless as it protected a training courtyard, which was seldom used. On the way, he made a stop at a spirit stone storage room. Dante Voidmind. The elder guarding the room raised a brow as he strode through the doorway. What are you doing here? Father instructed me to be helpful to the family by powering a defensive array, but I have been barred entry to void chambers recently and, therefore, lack the chi on hand to power an array single-handedly. Is that so? The elder smirked as he shifted from behind a table and walked toward him. Mind if I check? Go ahead, Dante presented his silver arm. He had nothing to fear from a check because he hadn't technically lied. He was out of chi, but it wasn't due to lack of cultivating but rather because he used up all the chi he had to assist Nox with purging that strange curse from her nascent soul. The elder placed 2 fingers on his wrist and closed his eyes. Dante felt a chill run through his arm and wrap around his star core as the elder's void invaded his body. You tell no lies. The elder muttered as he withdrew his withered hand and walked into the back of the room where the spatial rings filled with spirit stones were located. Dante waited patiently. Such a shame a promising youth like you has to be sacrificed for petty politics. The elder grumbled as he returned with a gold ring. 5th stage in the star core realm would have put you on track to surpassing your father one day. Maybe that is why he is more than happy to see me go. Dante gave the elder, whom he hardly saw outside this room, a strained smile. He had found his father's dismissal of him colder than expected, and he suspected his talents and thirst for power played a part in his downfall. His refusal to back down and constant offering to expand the family's power, a popular policy with the other elders, likely threatened his father. A talented heir wouldn't be a problem in another noble family since the Grand Elder would be centuries of cultivation ahead. However, in our family, where nobody can ascend to the nascent soul realm, it would only be a matter of time until I was also at the peak of the star core realm alongside my father. He must fear me. Why do you think I stay in here and keep my mouth shut? The elder laughed as he pushed the ring into Dante's hand and returned to his seat behind the table in this small room. A sad and quiet existence. Go defend the residence, or don't either way, I won't mention your visit here. Thank you, elder. Dante respected few people, but this elder, Jasper's father, had always been one of his favorites due to his integrity. Leaving the room, Dante walked toward the defensive array again with the spatial ring filled with spirit stones. But before he reached the hallway's end, he dipped into a side passage and descended a staircase to the lower level. Keeping his cloak's hood over his face as he passed by many servants through these narrow corridors, he soon came upon a room in a quieter part of the lower levels. "Jasper," Dante whispered to the man standing outside. "Oh, Dante, did you find some?" Jasper said. Dante was about to reply but had to stabilize himself on the nearby wall and wait a second as the entire residence shook due to the constant lightning blasting the mountain. "Yes, I did, here." Dante showed the golden ring. Jasper nodded and began creating a void bubble surrounding them and the doorway. This was an older void chamber, which was left unused as it lay in the residence's newly expanded servants' wing, making it the perfect place for Nox to undergo her ascension to Nascent Soul Realm. Dante gripped the golden ring and got ready to mentally remove all the spirit stones from it. He would need to chuck them into the chamber as fast as possible to avoid being consumed by Nox's darkness. Nox had requested this before she began the ascension. Dante had been wandering around looking for a way to get spirit stones without arousing suspicion when his father had given him the perfect excuse. However, I am doubtful that this botched ascension will work. How can this many spirit stones be enough to compensate for hiding from the heavens? My family has done centuries of research on ascending to the Nascent Soul, and one of the reasons we thought the void stifled our progress is that the heavens wouldn't strike us with lightning but rather become enraged and rain hell on the whole area. Usually, to ascend to Nascent Soul, a cultivator would pump their star core to its limit, causing it to go supernova. If they manage to control the supernova and survive, their soul will split in two, giving them an infant soul they can use to escape the clutches of time. This, of course, comes alongside the other benefits of having two star cores, such as doubling chi regeneration and offering two chi pools to pull from and twice the gravity to flatten those around them. So, hiding away in a void chamber like this deprives Nox of heaven's chi, which is usually needed to force the star core to critical mass and go supernova. And that's besides the fact she is still cursed and doing this all in an environment without much darkness chi. Is she insane? Despite Dante's strong thoughts on the matter, Nox had undoubtedly started the process. There was no backing out now. He could only sneak as many spirit stones as possible over the next week while this storm raged. Opening the door now. Get ready? Nox might still be in the supernova phase. Jasper said as the void bubble to avoid heaven being able to lock onto this location was set. They were now cut off from reality and in a self-contained pocket of void. The door swung open, and Dante had to wreath himself in a veil of the void to avoid being annihilated by the pressure that hit him. Within the center of the room, Nox was being orbited by two blazing stars of shadow that seemed hell-bent on trying to crush her, and she was desperately keeping them apart. Somehow, she had already made it past the supernova phase. Nox let out a hellish howl as she lost control briefly and was crushed between the two stars as they slammed into each other, sending out a wave of black flames that tore into the void chamber. Spirit stones, now! Nox shouted from between the stars, and Dante no longer hesitated and threw them in. Nox grasped at the hundreds of spirit stones and clutched them in her hands. Within seconds, they dulled as Nox pulled the chi stored within them into her body and barely managed to free herself by pushing the two stars apart again. If Dante looked really closely, he noticed the smaller of the two shadow stars had black vines poking out of its surface, which meant it was likely the cursed infant soul. Nox fed the smaller star some chi, making it grow. "I need more spirit stones," Nox shouted gruffly, and Dante happily slammed the door shut before he wasted any more of his precious void chi, avoiding being burned to death by waves of shadow flames. Now, where could he find more spirit stones? Chapter 239, Humanity. Ashlock had lived in this crazy new world for almost a decade, yet he had witnessed little of it as he could not travel or explore due to being a tree. However, he could picture the world beyond his roots borders through Stella and Diana's stories. Because of them, he learned that there were 9 cities of various sizes under the rule of the Blood Lotus sect's noble families, with Slimer being the closest as it was a short airship ride away. With his roots now sprawling out for 100 miles in all directions, Ashlock could experience these sights for himself, and from one look with Eye of the Tree God, it was obvious from afar that Slimer was nothing like Darklight City. Ashlock naturally knew Darklight City well as he had lived next to it for a decade and had done his best alongside his offspring and the Redclaws to improve the quality of life there. It was a sprawling metropolis reminiscent of a mega city in a developing country with its wooden housing, questionable infrastructure, poor hygiene, weak industries, and riddled slums that surrounded small condensed centers of wealth. In comparison, Slimer was 1,000 times smaller and reminded Ashlock of a Swiss ski resort in the way that the city was built up the side of a mountain. However, it had Gothic architecture rather than wooden cabins. Slimer was a city of black stone with spires reaching for the skies. An industrial center lay at the mountain's base. Large factory-style buildings with chimneys emitting smoke dominated this area. As one went up the mountain, the buildings became more grandiose, with some even having gardens built on platforms jutting out the cliff face, casting a shadow on the houses below. Meanwhile, at the very peak of the mountain, much like the white stone palace that the Red Clothes resided in, was a palace of the same black stone the rest of the city was constructed from, but it also had enormous windows and spires that went up for hundreds of meters. It looked like a strange mixture of a Gothic European castle, a church, and a university. It was clear from this brief overview where Slimer's wealth was concentrated, and that disparity was further heightened by the destruction Ashlock was witnessing. As hundreds of lightning bolts rained down and struck the city that went toward the spires of the black stone palace were consumed by bubbles of void that appeared out of nowhere. The few stray bolts that bypassed the void bubbles hit runically enhanced stone that could absorb the impact. In comparison, the rest of the city was a sea of destruction. The wrathful storm overhead mercilessly struck the city without pause, obliterating the stone spires and sending a landslide of rock that tumbled down the mountain and crushed the houses below. The industrial area, which had more wooden buildings, was ablaze, and a thick cloud of smoke surged up the mountainside, blanketing the whole city in darkness. I know that she magically empowers everything in this world. Plants grow ridiculously fast. A casual breeze can turn into a hurricane at a moment's notice. Storms are more fierce and can even turn into Tao storms with a level of sentience. Ashlock mused as he looked up at the wrathful storm above Slimer. But this storm is on another level to anything that could occur naturally, even in this crazy world, so it is likely man-made. Ashlock only knew two things that could create a destructive storm on this scale. When the Grand Elder of the Skyrend family, Demetrios Skyrend, was heading over to Darklight City, the storm he was traveling within was on this scale. The only other time Ashlock had seen a storm this violent was during a tribulation when someone was ascending to a higher realm. So either the Skyrend family is attacking Slimer, or someone is ascending, Ashlock concluded. Since Slimer was relatively close by, either option warranted an investigation. If the Skyrend family had begun the war, he needed to deploy countermeasures and maybe even pick a side to support from the shadows. Whereas if someone were ascending, he wanted to know who and if it was worth trying to stop them. The lightning doesn't seem to be striking anywhere in particular, which is uncommon for an ascension. Ashlock noticed as he surveyed the widespread destruction. From his experience, at least half, if not all, of the lightning bolts should be focused on trying to obliterate a person's star core if it were an ascension rather than senseless destruction. Though an attack is far more likely, so where could the Skyrends be hiding? The distance from his body and the insane amount of lightning chi that filled the air made tracking anything down amid the chaos a nightmare. Checking the skies led to no results. No flying ships or crazy lightning cultivators were floating above and hurling down bolts as if they were Zeus, so perhaps they were down in the city. Ashlock had roots near the city, so he could use Eye of the Tree God to peer through the layer of smoke blanketing the mountain city. As he searched the streets for any white-robed cultivators that looked like marble statues and were far too tall and arrogant, he became distracted by screams filling the air and watching mortal humans run helplessly down the winding streets only to be crushed to death by falling boulders. There aren't any here, Ashlock hummed as his gaze passed over the death and destruction without finding anyone from the Skyrend family. Though the screaming mortals are rather distracting and make searching for the Skyrend family difficult, I should go higher up. Ashlock made his way up the mountain and was now near what could be considered the noble district with large Gothic mansions. Not much caught his attention, though he was drawn to a beautiful, lonely cherry blossom on the edge of a garden platform that was sheltering a family. That has to be the first tree I have seen in this dreary city of Blackstone, Ashlock mulled as he saw its pink petals float away in the smoke down into the city filled with death and misery. Ashlock wondered why the family was standing under the tree when he noticed their house had been reduced to a pile of rubble, and the road that led down was blocked. They were trapped with nowhere to go other than hurling themselves off the platform, but it was at least 100-meter drop to the next house. "It's going to be okay, honey," a middle-aged woman said, ruffling her daughter's hair and hugging her tightly. "Mother's got you. It's going to be okay." Just hold on tight. Mommy, will the cultivator save us? The little girl asked innocently with eyes filled with hope as she buried her head into her mother's shoulder. They will, right? You told me they will protect us. The mother looked up at what Ashlock assumed was her husband with concern. The man with a neat beard and wearing well-tailored clothes who had been looking up at the void-mined castle looked down to meet his wife's gaze and sadly shook his head. They have abandoned us. The defensive arrays down here remain dormant. No. That can't be. The mother hugged her daughter tighter and seemed in despair as she began to quietly sob in her daughter's hair. We paid them almost everything we had, worked ourselves to the bone to carve a life here and save up for the ticket on the airship to escape the beast tide, but it was all for nothing. What about our daughter? Can't they at least save her? Catherine, you are too kind-hearted and naive. The husband knelt under the tree and lovingly wiped away her tears with a handkerchief as the world continued to explode around them. We are mortals, and they are cultivators. They defy the heavens while we cower below its wrath and beg for mercy. He rubbed her cheek and smiled sadly. They are walking gods to us, to them, we are nothing but cattle. But what about humanity? She protested. But the man just shook his head. When I did business with them, I could tell from their outlook on life and mannerisms that they were different from us below that human facade. They viewed life on a scale of time we simply can't comprehend. A lifetime to us filled with misery and joy? They will pass alone in a cave without another thought to increase their power. The man stood up and once again gazed up at the void-mined palace that effortlessly defended itself from the wrath of the heavens while everything below suffered. He raised his hand up to the sky as if trying to grasp it with a distant look in his eyes. I always wondered what it would be like to be born with the potential for cultivation, to reach for the heavens rather than fear them. To stand alongside walking gods and wield real power. He never finished his sentence as lightning tore through the smoke and struck the cherry blossom tree they cowered below, sending a wave of splinters in all directions and destroying a large section of the garden. What remained of the once beautiful cherry blossom trunk immediately ignited into a swirling blaze. If you spot this story on Amazon, know that it has been stolen. Report the violation. Due to the force, Catherine was sent tumbling, and on instinct, Ashlock noticed how she twisted her body to take the brunt of the impact away from her daughter's head. Despite being thrown a few meters and likely breaking a bone upon landing, the woman desperately got to her feet and screamed once she saw her husband desperately clinging onto the opposite edge of the hole with his legs having been blown off by the lightning. Julian. Hang on. Please don't let go. Catherine collapsed to her knees beside the hole in their garden that separated them with a clear view of the now destroyed house 100 meters below. Pieces of rubble kept raining as the garden platform became less stable due to Julian's struggle. Ashlock watched the rather dramatic scene and felt nothing. All he felt was regret that such a beautiful cherry blossom had suffered such a fate. He had seen hundreds, if not thousands, of people dying as he scoured the city for the source of the storm and hadn't stopped to think about saving the people. Was that wrong? Ashlock wondered as he watched this mortal man attempt to claw his way back up to the point his fingers bled while his wife and child screamed his name and sobbed. Digging deep, Ashlock found a slither of pity. They are so weak, Ashlock muttered. It was like watching a small animal caught in a mousetrap. Compared to cultivators, watching these mortals perish to a bit of lightning and falling rocks filled Ashlock with pity for their weakness. If they had been cultivators, a 100-meter drop would be no problem. He debated for a moment about helping them, but what was the point? They weren't his people and, therefore, not his responsibility. They were in a city under someone else's rule. Were these mortals even worth him wasting his chi on? Was there anything in it for him? No, there wasn't. This family offered nothing the millions of people in Darklight City couldn't provide, and using his chi here opened him up to problems, so it was best to turn a blind eye. His thought process was entirely logical, so why did it feel so wrong? Dad. The daughter wailed as she tried to wrestle out of her mother's embrace. Don't die, Dad. You still haven't told me all your stories. Tears were streaming down her face as she desperately called out to her father, who was growing paler by the second as 2 streams of blood poured down from his missing legs. Julian's desperate struggle to live slowed as his weak mortal body likely began to shut down. Looking over his shoulder, he gave his daughter a strained smile. Dad loves you. Take care of your mom and be a good girl, okay? No. Don't let go, Dad, keep trying. The little girl shouted. If the giant hole didn't separate them, perhaps the two could help him. This scene reminded Ashlock of when Stella had been shouting for him to return to her when he had almost died to that Dow storm. The system warned me about losing my humanity, and I had been convinced I could preserve it despite becoming a tree. When exactly did it slip away? Or was it a slow process? Either way, this revelation terrified Ashlock. What if one day, he watched on as Stella was dying and crying out to him, and he felt nothing like he did right now and couldn't be bothered to extend a branch to save her? At that point, what separated him from a lifeless husk? Dad. No. The girl's scream brought Ashlock back to reality, and he saw the man's grip slip, causing him to fall as the piece of rubble he had been grasping gave way. As he fell and looked up at his daughter, leaning over the side of the hole and calling to him, Ashlock saw a look of regret on the man's face. I know what that feels like, to regret leaving those behind. Ashlock's star core pulsed an entire valley away as he decided to wield his immense power over the world and stop holding back. Chi surged down through his roots, causing the air around the mortal man to ripple, and Terra Portal appeared below his flailing body and swallowed him whole before he impacted the stone below. He was still screaming as he was dumped beside his wife and daughter back on the garden above. Julian. Dad. His family shouted in a mixture of joy, fear, and confusion. Meanwhile, seeing them reunited made Ashlock feel happy. He was glad that the father hadn't perished. At least not yet, but he would soon. The mortal's body was ruined, both legs blasted off, and he was covered in burns. He was also suffering from blood loss and would likely pass away any minute now. Humans are so weak. They die to the smallest things. Ashlock sighed. He had been struck by enough lightning to start questioning if the heavens had a grudge against him, and he was fine. Meanwhile, this clearly influential mortal hadn't even been hit by it yet, had nearly died. I suppose saving him just to let him bleed out before his family would be in poor taste. Ashlock still struggled to care much if these mortals lived or died, but he felt invested in their survival now that he had dabbled in their fate. The man needed immediate care, and the mother had a broken arm, so she wouldn't be able to carry him through a portal. Not to mention, the lightning still raining down all around them could strike any second now. He needed to act quickly. How troublesome. Ashlock's vision blurred as he returned to Red Vine Peak and found Stella. Wake up, Stella. I need you to help me save the people of Slimer. What the hell did you say? Stella was startled awake by the sudden voice in her head. She yawned and desperately blinked away the drowsiness. Save Slimer's people. Why would we do that? There is a lightning storm destroying the city, and the Void Mind family has forsaken their people, Ashlock explained. Slimer is far smaller than Darklight City. Even if we brought all of them over here, it wouldn't cause many issues. What was he going on about? I mean, I guess so, we do have abundant food and space. But I still don't see why. Call it a fellow father's understanding. Now stop grumbling and put on your mask if you don't want them all looking up to you. Okay. Stella summoned a white wooden mask and fastened it to her face. I don't know why he is being whimsical and won't just tell me straight, but I have been terribly bored recently to the point I fell asleep, so this should be interesting. Ashlock opened a massive portal on Red Vine Peak, and Stella saw Zeus and Sol trudge through it. Stella followed them and was hit with the overwhelming smell of smoke as the portal snapped closed behind her. Stella surveyed the destruction all around. Thunder roared in her ears, and the clouds overhead unleashed endless bolts of lightning onto the city below. Mom, look. A cultivator came to save us. Stella turned and locked eyes with a young girl clutched in her mother's arms who was pointing at her. Tears streaked down the girl's face that failed to obscure the look of defiance and hope. Despite being a weak mortal that wouldn't live 100 years, it moved Stella's heart a little. Why do I feel bad for her? Stella wondered as she looked between the daughter, mother, and father. The two adults stopped staring at the ints and followed their daughter's finger. The mother immediately stood up and threw herself before Stella, slamming her head onto the stone. Esteemed cultivator, please, I beg you to save our daughter. I have broken my arm and my husband is about to pass on. There is no way my daughter will survive alone in this harsh world. So please. No, Stella replied. Why would she want to be left with someone's daughter? The mother raised her head, which was terribly bruised and bloodied, with a look of pure despair. Please don't be heartless, cultivator. You can grind my body into pills. I have money. Take anything you want. You can have it all, just please, save my daughter. Heartless. It just sounds annoying. Why should I have to take care of your daughter? Stella crouched before the woman and placed a finger under her chin, forcing her to look at her masked face. I said no, I will not take care of your daughter. Why? She seemed lost in despair. Silly woman. Why would I look after her when you can? No child deserves to live alone in this world, Stella said as warmly as she could. Soul, heal them. Starting with the father. The eight-armed ant crouched before the dying mortal man, making the ground tremble, and fished out a wisp of light. At this point, the man was delirious and phasing in and out of consciousness due to blood loss as the light enveloped his body. His legs exploded out as wiggling strands of muscle knit together around a regrowing bone and then became covered in skin. 2 hairless legs were regrown in under a minute, and Julian slowly woke up. The power of a god, Stella heard the woman muttered in awe as the man pushed himself up and looked down at his legs in total disbelief. Soul rose back to his full height and walked over to the mother. The poor mortal woman struggled to look up at the blazing ball of light as the ant dropped to one knee, and one of the arms bent down and pushed a wisp of light into her forehead. The bruise on her head visibly washed away, and her arm creaked and snapped back into place. She flexed her arm and seemed baffled at how it no longer hurt. How can we ever repay you? The woman began but screwed her eyes closed as the world lit up, and a lightning bolt descended on them. Thunder soon followed, roaring in the ears of everyone present. Good catch, Zeus, Stella complimented as the ant held the lightning bolt a few meters above their heads. The giant marble ant grinned as he spread out his arms and began to draw in all the lightning bolts that had been hitting the city and gathering them. Are you a goddess, miss? The daughter asked and tugged on Stella's trouser leg. Why are these mortals always so needy? They should just protect themselves. Stella paused and remembered how weak she had been despite her ability to become a cultivator as a child. If not for Tree, she would be dead by now. What if she had been born a mortal like this girl? Unless a cultivator watches over them for the rest of their lives, any simple thing could kill them. So weak. If only they could be cultivators, too. Stella suddenly had an idea. One that would make her look benevolent and make her no longer responsible for this girl that reminded her too much of herself. I am nothing so grand as a goddess, little girl. I am just a cultivator. Stella answered truthfully as her silver ring flashed and a truffle appeared. With this, you can be one too. Split it and share it with your parents. Consider it a gift from me. The girl seemed unsure what to do with the truffle, so she gave it to her mother. Go on, eat it. Stella insisted as the mortals gave her weird looks. With some hesitation, the little girl's mother split the small truffle into 3 even-sized pieces. She then distributed them to her daughter, who was now in her lap, and to her husband, who had walked over while keeping a piece for herself. All 3 swallowed the slice of truffle under Stella's further insistence. After a moment of nothing happening, all 3's eyes widened simultaneously. The truffle was working to turn them into cultivators, and it wasn't a pretty process. Chapter 240, Because I Can. Ashlock watched Stella hand the little girl one of his precious spirit root improvement truffles. Although he now had far more chi and could grow dozens in a fraction of a time compared to the past, they were still valuable. He had given Stella a couple so she could give them out as she saw fit. So he wasn't exactly mad at her for offering such a precious resource to a mortal, but it was still questionable. All 3 swallowed the slice of truffle under Stella's further insistence. After a moment of nothing happening, all 3's eyes widened simultaneously as their skin reddened, and their clothes became soaked in foul-smelling sludge, which Ashlock assumed were impurities, leaving their badly clogged-up spirit roots. Why did you give these mortals a truffle? Ashlock asked while the 3 mortals screamed in pain as their spirit roots opened up and their bodies became overwhelmed by ambient chi. Those are precious, you know. And we already have plenty of cultivators in Darklight City that will be living in the white stone pavilions under the red clothes soon. So there's no need to waste so many resources trying to force a mortal into a cultivator. Call it a fellow daughter's understanding. Stella laughed but then scrunched her nose at the foul stench. Oh, that stinks. Are mortals just walking flesh sacks of impurities? Stella stepped back while waving the stench away from her nose with her hand. Deciding it was too much, she casually sat on the edge of the giant hole while looking down at the smoking city. What do you mean by a fellow daughter's understanding? Ashlock insisted. He knew she was getting back at him for being vague earlier, but it seemed deeper than that. Stella sighed and looked over her shoulder at the girl crying in her mother's arms from the pain of transcending her mortal flesh. I saw a bit of myself in the girl and felt it was only fair to give her a fighting chance to keep her family alive, as that's something I wished I could do in the past. A fighting chance. You know that all you are giving them is false hope. The world of cultivation is even more brutal than that of a mortal. Even with purified spirit roots, they have no cultivation manuals or techniques to reach the higher realms. So they can only stagnate in the upper stages of the Chi realm as slightly stronger mortals for a few more decades. It was a harsh outlook, but he was just being realistic. Everyone seemed to be born in this world with a spirit root and the potential for cultivation. But they were held back by two factors: the purity of those spirit roots, which people in this world called talent, and access to cultivation resources at a young age, which few outside the noble families had. These mortals had neither. Even with the spirit root improvement truffle, they would be elevated from mortals with basically dead spirit roots to untalented cultivators. Stella snorted. "Tree, you can grow these truffles within days, don't get grumpy with me, they are hardly that rare. Though I do agree with you. It makes no sense to give false hope to mortals by making them weak cultivators, but aren't you forgetting that, unlike another sect, we have near unlimited cultivation resources? Turning these three mortals into powerful cultivators would be trivial to us." Ashlock grumbled to himself. "Easy for you to say when you aren't the one spending chi on growing them." If he hadn't grown a single truffle until this point, he would easily be in the 9th stage of the Star Core realm and on his way to forming a nascent soul. They weren't candies to be handed out to random people, hell, most of the Redclaws hadn't even been given one yet. What put these mortals ahead of the loyal Redclaw family? Ashlock sighed and decided what was done was done. No point dwelling on it. Fine, only these three will serve as a good case study for how my cultivation resources affect mortals, but no more. I have abundant food and land to provide the other mortals, but the cultivation resources are best spent developing the strength of our people first. Perhaps far in the future, he would have no qualms with helping mortals because his offspring could grow these truffles, or he had so much chi that it was insignificant. After all, he had been mortal once and understood what even a few more decades of life would mean to them. But there were simply too many mortals in this world to help, and he had too many enemies to be wasting resources on such a thing. I agree. I might have gotten a little ahead of myself. Stella stood up and dusted herself off as the screaming of the three ex-mortals calmed down. What should we do with them? Do you want me to lead them back home? Or were you serious about saving the other mortals of Slimer? Ashlock realized they had gotten a little distracted, but Zeus was currently drawing a good portion of the lightning to himself, so the city's destruction had lessened. Wait one moment, I'll handle it. Ashlock's vision blurred until he was in the study of the White Stone Palace, where he found the Redclaw Grand Elder leisurely reading over some reports and munching on a spicy fire fruit. The contrast between the chaos and destruction a mere airship ride away and the peaceful study almost gave Ashlock whiplash. "Grand Elder, I require your assistance with something," Ashlock said via abyssal whispers in the man's mind, and the poor guy almost choked on the fruit and fell out of his chair in shock at the sudden voice and hallucinations. "Ahem. How may I assist the immortal?" The Grand Elder awkwardly shuffled the parchments in his hands and tried to play off the earlier shameful display. "Slimer is currently undergoing a violent lightning storm that is either the result of an attack by the Skyrend family or an ascension. I haven't verified which one so far, but that's beside the point." Ashlock paused to let that sink in. "What I need your help with is escorting a mortal family that Stella turned into cultivators to a room somewhere here in the palace so I can keep a close eye on them, and if you come across this story on Amazon, it's taken without permission from the author. Report it." "What?" the Grand Elder shouted but quickly covered his mouth. "My apologies for the interruption." Ashlock knew the man was usually very composed, so he was curious about what had caused such an intense reaction. "What did I say that got you so surprised?" It could have been any one of the things he said. Was the news of an attack or ascension that shocking? "You claim that Stella turned mortals into cultivators," the Grand Elder said seriously. "That is frankly unprecedented. I've never in all my years heard of that happening before. I thought it was believed that mortals were either born with the talent to cultivate or not. Though, to be fair, even if there was a mystical way to achieve such a feat, I suppose there would be little gain in doing so other than acquiring wealth." "Wealth?" the Grand Elder nodded. "Some mortals are surprisingly wealthy despite their short lives. Often by working under the noble families and doing their dirty work like transporting spirit stones or selling them servants." Ashlock unexpectedly realized an untapped market he had overlooked before and felt foolish. He had assumed only cultivators would want to buy cultivation resources and had gone to great lengths to try and find a distribution channel that wouldn't get him killed, but there had been a city filled with millions of mortals nearby that he could sell to all along. Now that I think about it, wouldn't the billionaires back on Earth pay anything to get their hands on the truffle Stella had nonchalantly gifted that family? Even if in the grand schemes of this world, their change is insignificant compared to the powerful cultivations, for a mortal, it would be invaluable. Ashlock decided he should look into this some more. Perhaps he could have this mortal family help run a branch of the Ashlock trading company that focused on selling very watered-down products to mortals, since the man called Julian had mentioned working with cultivators before he got struck by lightning. If so, giving them the truffle wouldn't have been a complete waste. In fact, it already has yielded some interesting data. If I recall correctly, when the Redclaws ate the spirit root improvement truffle, their soul flames became purer over time. Meanwhile, the three mortals had impurities expelled from their bodies instead, as they had no soul flame. Ashlock was curious to see how taking the truffle at the start of one's cultivation journey would affect a cultivator in the long term. If the truffle had a similar effect on the mortals' spirit roots and they continued to improve over time, then perhaps turning mortals into cultivators wasn't as wasteful as it sounded. So I guess I will need to wait for one of them to reach the soul fire realm and acquire an affinity to see how pure their soul flames are. Ashlock pondered and was rather glad about his decision to save the mortals and have Stella meet them, as it had opened up a potential new avenue. Anyway, I apologize for interrupting you, the Grand Elder said after noticing Ashlock's brief silence. Please continue with what you were saying. Ashlock realized he had gotten sidetracked. I will be opening a portal to Slimer, and I want you to bring the three mortals that have been turned into cultivators back here and look after them. I will also send thousands of Slimer mortals through portals into the large square in the middle of the white stone pavilion. A lot of them will likely be very distressed and require assistance. Tell them they can restart their lives in Darklight City or take the first airship back to Slimer once the storm ends. The Grand Elder quickly stood up, and his chair fell to the ground with a thud. Why would you do such a thing? Ashlock posed that was a good question. Why was he doing all this? What drove him to save thousands of mortals he cared little for? Was he doing this as a roundabout way to selfishly preserve his humanity? To tip the balance of karma weighing on his soul for all the times he turned a blind eye when mortals died, such as to the giant worm he antagonized? Was it guilt? Did he perhaps have a hero complex he was trying to stroke? Or an ulterior motive, such as using these people as cheap labor? As it turned out, the answer was far simpler than all that. Because I can, Ashlock replied to the Grand Elder. His branches reached for the stars while his roots spread throughout the land. With a simple thought, he had the power to eradicate the millions of mortals that called Darklight City home, and with an equal amount of effort, he could save the people of Slimer. What was the point of having cultivated this level of power if he didn't intend to use it for what he felt like doing? He no longer had to cower in the shadows of the mountain and fear being discovered. The cat was out of the bag. The Ashlock Trading Company's name and location were displayed on the pendants of every bounty hunter throughout the wilderness. People were coming, and he was ready. Because you can, the Grand Elder mumbled as he stroked his chin. How can such a simple phrase hold so much depth? It speaks of your character, your unimaginable power, and your generosity. For someone as mighty as yourself to care for the life of those measly mortals makes me question my own actions. As they say, kindness is a virtue. All good deeds find their way back in unimaginable ways. Ashlock watched the Grand Elder close his eyes for a moment. Was he undergoing some sort of enlightenment? A while passed, and Ashlock decided that time was running out, so he set the anchor point and created a portal between the study and where he had left Stella. The Grand Elder's eyes snapped open, and Ashlock could see a deep profoundness in his eyes. They were tranquil and calm, as if nothing would faze the man. The immortal is wise, he said as he drifted across the study toward the portal with his arms behind his back. It would be my honor to carry out your request. Passing through the portal, the Grand Elder didn't even react to the stench of smoke mixed with impurities as he exchanged a short nod with Stella, who had patiently waited. Apologize for my late arrival, mistress. Are these the mortals you granted cultivation to? That is correct, Grand Elder, Stella nodded. Have you come to take them away? Per the immortal's commands, I will bring them back to the White Stone Palace for safety. The Grand Elder stopped before the mother and offered them a smile. If you can stand, please follow me. All three had stopped screaming due to the pain and were now collapsed on the floor and breathing heavily. They likely would have passed out if not for the healing light still present in their bodies from earlier. Catherine was the first to get up, closely followed by Julian, who picked his daughter up and draped her exhausted body over his shoulder. With a nod, the group followed behind the Redclaw Grand Elder to the portal. "Even if you aren't a goddess, thank you for saving us," the daughter called out sleepily from her father's shoulder. Stella briefly glanced over her shoulder with her white mask still on and simply returned a nod before returning to surveying the destruction down below. The portal snapped closed. With them out of the way, Ashlock made one more portal and sent Soul to stand by in the large square where he would send the Slimer mortals. He had no doubt that some of them would require healing. Ashlock was about to ask Stella if she was ready once that portal closed when he heard someone shouting from above. "I knew the Skyrend bastards had gone against the rules." A tall, slender man who resembled an older Dante Voidmind stood upon a sword with a lance of void conjuring in his hand. Judging by his presence and appearance, there was a good chance this was the Voidmind Grand Elder and Dante Voidmind's father.